All right, we are live and welcome in to Open Mic, where we are going to be discussing how to write songs faster, how to finish more music, and how you can quickly and easily improve your music productions and songwriting as well. So, got a lot of stuff to talk about here. It's going to be really fun. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and leave those below. Quick introduction here. I'm joined by Joseph with Songwriter Theory and Chad
Hello,
with,
friends.
what was
At
that?
home, at home songwriting.
At home songwriting. And so this is really great. I know we've done one of these before, but now this is our second one here. We're trying to do this once a month, and we got Chad joining us now, so that's awesome. We got another viewpoint, more perspective, and more wisdom to share with you. So I guess to get started here, we'll just introduce ourselves to you. So Joseph, you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Joseph from Songwriter Theory. I wasn't prepared to do this, so I teach songwriting. Probably, really, if I were smart, I would have called it at-home songwriting, which Chad was smart enough to do, because that's my main target audience. But yeah, just like talking about songwriting. I'm passionate about songwriting. I care about the craft of songwriting, and for me personally, it's just exciting when I know other people care about that craft too, being able to share that, because as I say at the beginning of a lot of podcast episodes, you could be choosing to listen to Joe Rogan or something, but you're listening to a songwriting podcast, which is pretty awesome. They care enough about the craft that instead of listening to maybe an entertaining podcast, you're choosing to talk songwriting. So just in general, that people still care about the craft of songwriting, to me.
You're entertaining. You're entertaining. You're entertaining. I've listened to your podcast. You're entertaining.
Depends who you ask, I think.
You're okay.
Exactly. Point made.
So, Chad, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Chad Schenk. I have been writing songs since I was in middle school, back in the days when we used to record on cassettes. Some of you may remember the world of cassettes. I have always loved songwriting like Joseph. I love the craft of it. I love getting excited about tinkering with songs and figuring out how do you make songs sound a certain way, and just always sort of improving what I'm doing myself. I have a YouTube channel, At Home Songwriting. Some of you might be watching it here. And then I'm also an instructor for Berklee Online. So I actually teach lyric writing for Berklee. So that's me.
Awesome. What's that like teaching at Berklee?
I think it's
and how'd you maybe this is too long. This might be a big question too, but how'd you end up teaching at Berklee as well?
So I went to Berklee Online, and I stayed in touch with some of my professors, and they sort of paid attention to like the teaching I was doing. I teach local community classes as well, around Minneapolis, and then with YouTube, and I was the education director of Minnesota Association of Songwriters, and
Nice.
just our paths kept crossing, and it kind of came up that there was an opportunity. And I have to give a lot of thanks to Andrea Stolpe, who really sort of gave me a good recommendation, and you know, here I am. So it's been fun. It's awesome.
That's
Not
really
to mention
cool.
that's a heck of a name drop in the songwriting education world.
Oh, for sure.
She's legend is maybe a strong word, but she's like, if you ask people, tell me like 3 teachers of songwriting, and you're not allowed to say like John Mayer or something like that, right? Because he does talk a lot about songwriting, and I appreciate him for doing that. But Andrea Stolpe has to be like top 2, 3 for like most well known.
Yeah, it's Andrea Stolpe and Pat Pattison.
Yep. Yep, that's the other one.
So I actually teach Pat's class. So all of the curriculum was created by Pat. So I teach his lyric course. So
great.
I see I see the question. I'm considering Berklee Online. Is it good? I mean, I work for them, so obviously people will say bias, but seriously, I have been a fan of Berklee even before I ever worked there. Like the classes, it's 12 weeks at a time, super immersive. You get attention from the instructors, and you do a lot of writing and a lot of lessons. So it really, over the 12 weeks, you really have a chance to improve. So I highly recommend it. It's not cheap, but it's definitely worth it. It's an investment.
Awesome. So I guess I'll introduce myself then. Hi, I'm Reagan Ram with Orpheus Audio Academy, and I was a little bit later. I joined a little bit later to the music scene. It wasn't until I graduated high school. It was about 2012. when I first started getting into music production, and I knew nothing. I couldn't even like quantize my tracks, so nothing was in time. I didn't even know what the notes on a keyboard were. I didn't know what an A was or a B. I just started hitting
Wow.
random keys. And so I'm like, hey, all the white keys sound good together. And hey, all the black keys sound good together. And that's how I started making music. But then I realized, hey, I'm really passionate about this. I want to do this full time. So I ended up going to school and graduated in 2019, got an audio engineering degree. And I'm also really passionate about teaching. So I'm like, hey, I start Orpheus Audio Academy and start teaching others. And that's how I got here.
Where did you go to school?
I went to a Unity Gain Recording Institute in Fort Myers, Florida. And
Cool.
that was really good because though it is a accredited college, it was really a lot more like an apprenticeship program because the school was actually a commercial recording studio and the instructor was the owner of the studio. And so part of our education was actually recording other artists. The class size was only like, depending on what semester, there's only like 4 to 5 other people in my class. So we kind of all got to
Cool.
experience actually recording real bands, mixing real bands. And so it was really like hands-on, using a mixing console, using actual equipment and setting up microphones, miking things. So it was really awesome experience and definitely really helped elevate my knowledge and skill set very, very quickly.
Awesome. That's sweet.
Yeah, man, I wish apprenticeships were the way of things because it's so much better. It's just so much better. Even ignoring the fact that like college often fails greatly in actually preparing you for the job you do, even ignoring that thing that is true for like 99% of degrees. It just most people learn so much better that way.
I think too with the music industry, like some of the schools pitch it like if you go here, you can get a job in the music industry.
Yeah.
And it's like the music industry is freelance, right? Like you don't find a job, you find many jobs.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think apprenticeship is the way to go. And I think the real schools, you know, they don't BS you. They actually tell you like you're gonna have to be somebody's assistant before you can, you know, be the main person, right?
Yeah.
So friggin' sweet.
For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So just a real quick just rundown of what the structure of this show is going to be. So we're going to start off sharing some of our quick song improvement hacks. So just some quick tips on how you can improve your songwriting and music production. Then we'll transition into talking about how you can finish songs faster. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with a Q&A section where you guys can ask questions and we'll answer them. So I guess we'll get started here.
Don't forget about the questions we already have.
Yes. Yeah, we do.
Yes.
I'm just checking those now. They're coming in.
But also, yes, please leave your.
Apparently, we have great origin stories, so that's cool.
Well, clearly they were talking about you guys because I was not ready and was like, "I'll say stuff."
I have a question for Joseph. Actually,
really,
have you cut those vocals yet?
That's a great question. I've done a decent amount of them, but I have not finished. My hard thing is to be done by the end of the year because I'm so sick of just usually song. Forgive me for everybody who knows this already, but finishing songs is not my problem. Finishing recording vocals for the recordings of my songs that are otherwise done is my problem. I think I've mentioned this before, but I think literally there's 20 songs that are vocals away, which is just inexcusable. So that's the background to Chad's question. But yeah, I have of the 5 songs that I'm specifically targeting for this EP, I have the leads done ish in 2.5 to 3 of them, I think. And this Saturday, my wife has given me a whole day, which I appreciate. But I think we talked about this a lot. I think this was maybe the last one with or the last episode of Open Mic. But man, knowing specifically with vocals, I don't know what it is. That it's like that much harder to figure out when you have the take. Sometimes it's obvious, but a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of like, man, was that good enough? Because then you listen to some of your favorite recordings and you're like, those have flaws. They just have likable flaws. But you don't know which of your flaws are likable flaws sometimes. Sometimes you can tell, but sometimes it's like, should I sing that more traditionally well, or should I keep the character that I had in that version? But the booth is like the shower, hard to get in, hard to get out.
I like that. I
That
like
is
that.
so true.
Yeah, I was
Man,
admiring your
I
booth.
might
You actually
steal
have a
that.
booth.
Yeah, you can kind of see the booth, the makeshift booth that I made from a YouTube tutorial. It's just like packing blankets from
Yeah, moving blankets.
Amazon and PVC pipe, and it does work
Cool.
well. Yeah, I won't say more about it, although I
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same
along with it.
same boat because, but I'm gonna blame my wife though because we need to add her vocals, but it's hard to get her. Find the time for her to sing, but because we have 4 children and we just had a baby
Minor
3 months
detail.
ago, so that's kind of the holdup.
Yeah. So, Chad, I'm guessing that means in the meantime you have totally written, recorded, and released 30 songs since we talked last.
Probably like 10 to 15 I have done.
Yeah, that's baller, man. Actually, you inspired me. I ended up cutting it out of the podcast because the way I worded it was funky. But the podcast I released the other day and the original recording, I mentioned that a part of what I was talking about and had the exercise I decided to force myself to do was actually from our conversation, where I feel like there's always this tension, right, between quality and efficiency. And my personal opinion is that almost everybody tends to be way too far in one direction or the other. So there's those of us that are so obsessed with quality that maybe we are better at getting the quality up and up and up, but we're not. Like at some point it's like, okay, but pump out some songs. Like even as an exercise, it would be good for you. And of course, being more efficient is better.
Yeah.
And then I think the tendency is there are some people who will be like, dude, I write a song every hour. What are you talking about? I'm like, okay, I can 100% guarantee without looking at your songs that your lyrics are
I've
not
never met
great, would be
anyone who
charitable.
said that.
I mean, I've met a couple, and it's usually like, yeah, I'm not going to tell you that I can tell, but I definitely can tell, and that's fine, right, for a first draft. But anyway, the conversation I had with, the actual conversation me and Chad had live on YouTube, and probably behind the scenes. I don't remember, some combination. But anyway, I don't remember if you actually challenged me, Chad, but our conversation brought up enough where I'm like, you know what? I do think that as a good exercise to obsess more about efficiency and just to challenge myself, I want to try doing things like I set a timer for an hour and I'm like, you have to start and finish a song. And I know it's not going to be great, especially lyrically. I was pretty surprised. A lot of times the lyrics were a little better than I thought they would be the first time around. And the music was actually consistently better than I thought it would be. But just as like an exercise to get like a draft out there, I have really, really liked it. So I'm actually going to keep that method as not my only way, but sort of a way to like, I'm thinking about doing something where like 3 days a week I do that. And then other 3 days is more my traditional way, which I do like. It's not like I'm going to abandon it, but so anyway, good job, Chad. You inspired me.
Well,
It's good stuff.
I think I remember that conversation actually, and I think I remember telling you like you don't have to be all one way, right? Like you don't have to be the guy who takes 8 months to finish one song.
Yes.
You can, but you can also try to write a song in an hour too. You know,
Yes.
you can, kind of switch it up. One thing that I want people to realize is the amount of time it takes you to do something can also have nothing to do, like it can have no impact on the quality of what you're doing too, because I've seen people write a song that
sure.
takes 10 months and they just write it into the dirt, right?
That happens for sure.
So you have to sort of develop your instinct to know like you literally could spit something out that is it, right?
Yeah.
So I think when people say you need to rewrite, it's like, do you though? Like if it's good, it's good. You know what I mean? Like you
That's
have,
true.
but that's developing your instinct to sort of trust yourself. And I think
Yeah.
that comes from just writing a lot
Mhm.
and learning how to write songs. Like I think we start off thinking, how do I write a good song? But it's actually how do you become a better songwriter
Yeah.
more than how do you write a better song? You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah. Now that you say that, I do remember you mentioning that. I think too, like there's something to sometimes just getting out some bad songs and being at peace with it. And if you write it in an hour, who cares? Like you lost an hour and you did an exercise that will make you a better songwriter, which is another thing that like I'm like, all right, this seems like a cool thing to try. Not that you said the hour thing specifically, but this was kind of my thing off of that I want to try just as a challenge. And yeah, it is interesting how like sometimes in the shorter amount of time you do come up with something better than you thought you would, and maybe it doesn't need as much editing as you would think. So far, the biggest weakness that I see is I feel like it's a little, because there's such a short amount of time, you're going to tend to simplify because you only have that much time. So that's which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? But like, especially if you're somebody who wants to try like different song structures and to have more lyrics and to maybe not have, like, for example, if you want to like a pop chorus that's like line, repeated line. So you essentially had 3 lines you had to write, then it's a lot easier to get that done in an hour. But if you're trying to do like a song that maybe some people would accuse of being overwrought or whatever and has tons of song sections, it's a little harder to get that done in a shorter amount of time. But to your point, yeah, for sure. I think trying at doing both. The fact that like you don't have to be one or the other, and you may be surprised. I would say for all people, you may be surprised by the opposite one, right? I think some people are surprised. Eventually, I sell them on like, okay, how about moving in the quality direction? And then they're like, oh, wow, editing lyrics helped me take something that I didn't feel great about to something really good. And then on the other side, there's those of us that are like, oh, wow, I write better stuff in an hour than I thought I could. So I think both camps learning to like do both is probably helpful for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, writing music, producing music in general is so subjective, and there's so many different ways to do it, correctly. But in my experience, it seems like most of the time you're going to arrive at better quality the faster you go, actually. And this happened to me so many times where I'd have these songs and I kept mixing them. This is on the mixing side of things. And then I'm like, it just kept getting worse and worse. Right? You keep tweaking stuff and adding stuff. I'm like, this needs a third compressor. This needs a fourth EQ, and then it's just a mess. And now, I think I'm doing some of my best music production, and I'm writing some songs for a client, and like I'm putting out songs in like 2 hours. The whole song's done, and client's really happy with it. I think it sounds really good. And that seems to be our experience too. When I was again in college, when I was at the studio learning, we were recording bands. A secret my instructor told me was we have everyone sing a practice track where we say we're not recording them, but we secretly record them because in the experience of my instructor, who's been doing it since like the late 70s, he's been recording and mixing since the late 70s. He's like, most of the time, the first take is always the best. So, I mean, that's assuming, right? They've probably been practicing already. They're coming into a studio to record. So maybe it's a little different when you're writing at home and you're, feeling things out and recording for the first time. So definitely you want to maybe practice it. But when you're really sitting down to record,
if you don't tell them you hit the record button.
Oh yeah, we don't tell them. We don't tell them we're recording.
Yeah.
And they don't know what take we use, because they'll record a couple takes and then we edit it together, recomp it and everything, and they just hear the final version. They don't know what take it was. So
and like fear once the record button is hit is a very real thing, I think, for sure. Sometimes I'll notice, like, even with singing, it's like I have to like do stupid things to relax after, to be like, all right, stop. Nobody's here. If you screw it up, nobody cares. You can get rid of this take.
Jonathan Lewis says, I did a 30-day challenge of writing a song every day. I started to find a rhythm to it. It was very good exercise. Awesome. Yeah, and that's great. There was a time where I was doing that too, and I was writing very frequently. I was like creating new music all the time, because back then I wasn't like finding any new music that I liked. So I'm like, well, we're gonna just write a song that I like, so I have something new to listen to. So I was doing that like almost every day, and like occasionally I would like write a song that I'd start writing it, and this is horrible, I don't like this, but it didn't bother me because I knew I was going to write another song tomorrow. So if you have such long droughts between songwriting, then there's a whole lot more pressure each time you go to write a song that it has to be good. And if it's 100%. Not, you get very discouraged, you get very depressed, you think, I'm not cut out for this, this is too hard. But if you just instead make your measurement not quality, not the result, but the actions you're taking, like how many songs are you writing, how much time are you spending songwriting, if that's how you measure success, then even if you write a horrible song, you can feel good about yourself And that's not a bad thing because you're making progress every time you put in the time to create a song. You're going to get better over time. And now your emotions aren't attached to what happens in that songwriting section or songwriting session. And you become kind of emotionally invincible, and you just put in the time and you get better and you start producing songs that you're proud of.
No, there's something what you said where I've known writers who the songs become a golden egg, right? Like they think that this is their shot, or it's their one song that's gonna, be the one. And it's like chances are it's not, right? Like you're gonna write more songs, you're gonna get better. This isn't the best song that you're gonna write. Pat Pattison says 90% of what you write is not your best 10%. So if you want to have more good songs, you have to fill the 90% and not worry, and the 10% takes care of themselves, right? So um, you have to be willing to sort of take the risk and just try it, because it's like muscles, right? The more you use the songwriting muscle, the more you understand, like, well, that didn't work, so I'm going to try something else. And that's how you build your instinct, I think. And that's what, pro writers do, is they've just done it so much that they can sense when something's working and when something's not. And I also think you blow through all the cliches that are in your brain. Like eventually you'll run out of the dumb stuff. You'll get to the good stuff eventually.
That's really good. That's happened to me so many times where I'm like, oh, oh, this is a really good one. This might be one of my best songs. I can't release this. I can't put this out. I gotta spend extra time on this one, making sure it's really good, and then you never put it out there. And so, yeah, I've learned you just kind of have to bet on yourself that no, I got even better songs in the future. So I can put this out, even if it's not perfect. I'm betting on myself that I'm going to be able to write even better songs in the future. So it's okay if this isn't perfect. Just put it out and keep growing.
Do you have any songs from like 5-10 years ago that you thought were like, that's the song, and now you listen back and you're like, what the F was I hearing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when you see yourself in a picture, you're like, oh my God, I look fat and hideous. But like in 5 years, you'll look back and be like, I didn't look fat and hideous, right? So it's kind of the same with songwriting, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that for sure. For sure. Also,
68 out of 100. That's a
yeah,
lot.
that is a lot. That is a lot.
Could probably
Sure.
do a video himself on what he's learned.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
maybe
so, yeah.
that's why he's doing it.
Skirba-derba.
Yeah. I was also looking at the name like, all right. Yeah, who are we talking about here? That is a long name.
So I guess we've kind of already started getting into I guess we're kind of doing a mix of how to improve and also write faster. So yeah, do you guys what are some like just quick tips that you have, like maybe little hacks that you do to improve the quality of your songwriting
Uh,
or lyric
Soul,
writing?
Soul has a good comment. She said Alanis Morissette lyrics feel like she's reading from a journal. What is that style of songwriting known as? It also feels like a rap, even though it's not that genre. Um, I would say that one of the most effective ways to actually write lyrics is to actually free write about a topic or about what you're feeling, and sort of do it as a timed thing, like 5 or 10 minutes, and just write whatever comes to your mind and whatever you're feeling. And I think it comes out being like a journal. But if you're not thinking in rhyme, you're not thinking in rhythm, you're just free writing, you can access that part of your mind where you're not criticizing, you're just thinking and spitting it out there. So I'm assuming that's probably what Alanis does. I don't know if there's an actual name for that, but and as far as sounding like a rap, I think that has more to do with performance and rhythm probably than anything, I would think. But that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, if you just have a lot of lyrics, it can sound like a rap too. So I know that's how like 21 Pilots, why they started rapping, was just because they had a lot of lyrics. They didn't really intend to rap. So yeah.
So your question was, how do we make our songwriting more efficient? Was that, or what are some hacks?
Yeah, I guess to improve just the quality, making your music more interesting, right? Obviously, there's practice a lot, right? Spend a lot of time, spend a lot of time learning, studying, right? Those are all good practices to incorporate into your life. But they take time, right? So I don't know if there's any just like quick hacks you've stumbled upon, just little things that doesn't take a lot of time that can really disproportionately improve the quality of the song that you're writing.
Yeah, I think for me, it's you don't always have to write a full song all the time, right? So figuring out what you are the worst at, right? Like maybe you're like, I can't write choruses very well. I would suggest taking some time every day and just focus on writing choruses. Like find titles. There's a lot of different templates for choruses on how to drop lines in. The quickest way to write a chorus is just repeat your title, right? So like you can literally write a chorus in 5 seconds. But I think of it like sports, right? Like a football team, they run drills and they do all these like practice plays. They don't play a game every day. And I think as songwriters, one of the ways that you can get better is to focus on what you're not as strong at and just focus on that a little bit every day, and then move to the stuff that you're good at, and eventually uh, kind of make the loop around. Like then write verses and try to do melodies or listen to songs that you like and try to figure out how the structure is working. What's the rhyme scheme? What's the tempo? What's the song form? Um, what's the melodic scheme? Like, are there, Taylor Swift a lot of times does a melody line, she repeats the melody line, she varies it a little bit, and then she varies it a whole bunch, right? So there's this sort of like repeatable pattern that you can see in the work that you can pull out too. And honestly, I think the quickest way to improve your songs is improve your melodies, because a weak melody can't like a weak melody cannot be saved by good lyrics, but okay lyrics can be saved by a strong melody. I think I said that right, but those are some of my thoughts.
Awesome. So then how do you write a great melody? Or maybe that's a whole other topic, but how do
Yeah,
you how do you make sure you're right? How do you know if a melody is good? How do you
Way,
how do
way
you
to
do that?
ask a really easily answerable question, Reagan.
I have an answer. So the thing about melody, it's not about, like when people think of melody, sometimes you think of like, I need to make a song that Celine Dion will sing, right? Like it's got to have a soaring melody. But the reality of melody is the magic lives in the rhythm. So melody is made of rhythm and pitch. A melody is just pitches played to a rhythm, right? So the way that you create better melodies is you have better rhythm and you have motifs. So each song section should really only have one or two recognizable little phrases or motifs, because the magic lives in the memorable phrase that you just sort of stack and put them together in some sort of pattern. A lot of hit songs, the melody scheme matches the rhyme scheme. So if it's A, B, A, B, you would have motif one, motif two, motif one, motif two. If it's A, B, B, it would be motif, motif, and then motif two, right? Um, and the other key for melody is contrast. So whatever you're doing in your verse, do something different in the chorus. So change the rhythm, change the um, the pitch range, change the actual like where you're starting in the measure. Are you starting before the downbeat? Are you starting after the downbeat? Those are all things that you can do too.
That's really
Uh,
good.
Thank you. No one will ever learn the lyrics if the melody is bad. Yeah,
100%.
people hum melodies. They don't hum lyrics.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No.
Sometimes I know you're not. I just know that there's a lot of those people out there. So for everybody listening, that's not an excuse to not care about lyrics. But melody is absolutely king. I feel like anybody there's very few things I would say about songwriting where I would be like, if somebody tells you X, run. I think if somebody disagrees with like melody is king, right? They're like, no, chord progressions are more important, or no, the lyrics are more important than the melody. I think there's maybe an argument for that one. I think chords being more important is
I'm
absolutely.
always getting chord progression stuck in my head.
Said no one ever. Said no human being ever. Which doesn't mean they're not important. Just because you don't notice it doesn't mean they're not important. It's like an offensive line in football. Just because you only notice the offensive line in football when the quarterback's on the ground and they're not doing their job doesn't mean it's not important. But melody's absolutely king. I mean, I don't.
So
It's just it. Your song is gonna live and die by it. And there's some people, frankly, that will never know your lyrics or pay attention, and you can get away with crap lyrics. That's absolutely true. That doesn't mean that as people who theoretically care about the craft, that we should use that as an excuse. Although some people seem to want to do that. But yeah, I mean, melody absolutely is king for sure. No question.
Yeah, and I think the real goal is to have a good melody with good lyrics, right? Like that's the ultimate combination. But I like to think of it as like a like musical theater or just live theater in general. I like to think of the lyrics as the script and the melody as the actors. If the actors aren't very good, it doesn't matter if the script is good, because if they can't act it, we don't believe it.
Yep.
But then the chords are the lighting. So the chords are coloring the melody and the lyrics. So they're kind of giving this sort of tinge of what we should be feeling from a musical perspective. So it's more of a coloring rather than the main thing. So
and they have to match, right? You can have a great actor, but if they're miscast, it doesn't matter how
Right.
great they are, right? Like,
right. Yep.
Pick any actor, right? I love, I don't know, why am I forgetting Gladiator's name?
Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe, thank you. But like that doesn't mean that Russell Crowe is going to be great in every movie, right? Because
Right.
I do think he's a great actor, and especially in the early 2000s, that man was unstoppable. But that doesn't mean that he'd be perfect for everything, right? Like, you know,
Yep.
he may be a better actor than, I don't know, I don't want to pick on somebody, but like Rainn Wilson from The Office, but nobody could do Dwight as well as Rainn Wilson from The Office, and I wouldn't change him out for anybody, no matter how good of an actor they are. And I'm not saying Rainn's not a good actor too. I'm just saying, like, he's probably not Russell Crowe. And maybe he is, maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, the fact that like the actor needs to also match with it makes that analogy, I think, even more perfect. Where like it's a great analogy because it works on all those levels where like both are important, agnostic of each other, but it's also important that they match with each other, because a great script with miscast people still is probably not going to work that well.
Yeah.
Because they need to be in conjunction. Also, there was the free falling though. I'm about that progression. So this is a theory that I've been thinking through for like months now. I would argue that chord progression. I would argue that chord progression at that point is both a chord progression and a hook.
Yeah.
Because it's so rhythmic and has a melody to it, even, right? Like you can, like in your head, I bet you can like hum that chord progression, which tells you that it's probably a melodic one. So I would argue that it could be true technically that you're about that chord progression, but I would argue it's not really the chord progression you're about. It's the hook that is contained within that chord progression. So it's the same thing with like, say, Seven Nation Army. Technically, that bass line / guitar riff / whatever that every freaking college is singing after every down in football, which doesn't drive me crazy at all. You know, that is a chord progression, technically. Power chords, but it's a chord progression. Yeah. But it's primarily a hook in that it's something that's singable and has a real rhythm to it. So yes, the free falling chord progression I think is great, but I would argue that you're not noticing it. It's still not the chord progression technically that you're noticing. It's the hook that's within it. But that's just my songwriter theory, I guess.
It's so it's a harmonized melody, basically.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Technic Tone has in pop, lots of artists use the same chord progressions, and if you did that with melodies, you'd find yourself in chord. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Taylor Swift, somebody on YouTube did a whole video about, she had like 21 hits with the exact same chord progression, and all the songs sound different. You know what I mean? So it's like the 1-5, I think it's the 1-5-6-4 chord progression.
I'm sure it is.
And
yeah.
But like the thing is if you want if you want your listener to pay attention to what's happening in the lyrics and what's happening in the melody, you have simple chord progressions, because not everything can be the center of attention, right? If you had a really complicated chord progression plus a complicated melody plus really complicated lyrics, um, you would lose your listener because they don't know what to focus on. So I think the chords, the more simple they are, the more interesting you can make the other parts of it. And I do want to say the big thing I disagree with Rick Beato about. I agree with Rick Beato about a lot of stuff, but when he goes into grumpy old man mode and he's talking about songs can't be good if they only have two chords, it's like, sit down, grandpa. Like, not every song needs these complicated chord progressions for it to be good, right? And I just think if songwriters think the way to write better songs is I need more chords, I think they're going down the wrong path. And I think that's what Joseph you've talked about before too.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of a centrist on this issue, admittedly, because I think we talked about this in our last call, and I do stand by that. I think the chord progression needs to best serve the melody and lyrics. What the chord progression is doesn't matter. So it can be a 2-chord song and be awesome if done correctly. Correctly, right? I know that's a loaded term, but so I do agree with you that, like, oh, just because it's a 2-chord song doesn't mean it sucks. But I also do think that there's something to, if we can make the chord progression more interesting as well, and it doesn't take away from the song, obviously it's not a net bad, right? So, and everybody's going to have a different theory on this, and I think they're all fine ways to address it. It probably depends on the instrument people play too.
Yeah.
For me, I'm a big fan of trying to combine a hook, sort of the free falling example. I'm a big fan of having a hook built into my main instrument, which usually is piano. So I'll usually have a hook in the piano, which I think I'm going to have a video out pretty soon about how to write a piano hook, like a simple way to write a piano hook. But the TLDR is basically bass line left hand, and then right hand, some form of hook, which you could loosely say you can have a melodic hook. You can have a like arpeggiated broken chord hook where it's basically just chords, but you figure out a broken chord pattern. Technically wouldn't be arpeggiated if it's not all up or all down, but neither here nor there. But like just that little extra attention to detail, I think can go a really long way. Where like with Free Fallin', where would that song be without the fact that the chord progression is an awesome hook too? Because I think like if you nail the hook of a song, not every song has a hook, but if you nail a hook, instrument hook, not hook as a term for a chorus, if you nail a hook, and then especially in a verse where it's more important, I think, to have a hook because the verses are more boring otherwise than the chorus, theoretically. So the chorus is so carried by the vocal that I think everything else almost doesn't matter. So I think if you're going to choose one place to have a instrument hook, like a catchy bass line or something, probably a verse is more important. But if you nail that and you nail the melody and lyrics, that's where we have a song, and almost anything else probably doesn't matter. I actually love grumpy old man Rick, because even though I'm young, I mostly agree with him. But also, like, I love Rick Beato. I don't want this to be taken out of context, but Rick is like a producer first, right? So he kind of like sees everything through the lens of like music theory and production. So in the Venn diagram, I'm like half him because I share his love of theory, and I share his passion that understanding theory is a powerful tool to be a better writer. 100% with him. Anybody who knows me at all knows I'm huge on that. But I think he's a person, like, he even admits he doesn't pay attention to lyrics, right? To me, and to me, it's like, okay, you've lost the plot. Once we're talking about how great a song is, but you don't pay attention to the lyrics at all, that's where I'm like, okay, okay, you can't tell me the song's great just because the production sounds good and the chord progression was interesting, which admittedly I think Rick does.
That's
So-
funny
More
because
often than I'd like.
I often don't pay attention to lyrics either when I'm listening to music. I'm usually more focused on the actual music itself.
Well, you're a mixer producer, so it kind of makes sense, right? It's kind of like drummers. When I had a drummer in my band, the biggest thing I learned is that a lot of people see music simply through the lens of the thing they do.
Right. So but that's funny because I actually, before I started music, I wrote novels. So I was a blogger. So I was a writer long before I was a musician. And then I still do like write lyrics from my music, but for whatever reason, I've always just been drawn to more to the music, the melodic elements.
I think the music is what hooks you, right? But then the lyrics are what make you stay. Is kind of like That's a real. That's
Yeah,
trite
if I really
and
like
not
the song,
completely
I'll
true.
try to figure out, okay, what are the lyrics here? What's going on?
So
Yeah.
Andrea Stolpe says the lyrics tell you something and the music tells you how to feel about it. So the lyrics are like for your head and the music is for your heart. But I think the whole goal for all of us should be, does the music support what we're trying to say? Or what is the emotion that we're trying to communicate? Because ultimately, I think songwriting is communication. We're all friends here, Joseph. Skirba says that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate
Oh
that.
yeah, you were making me. I was smiling a few times because I was thinking the same thing.
Well, just because sometimes people get they take a thing you say where it's like, yes, I did say that, but like anything we say in a certain amount of time is going to not be 100% completely true, right? It's
Right,
not
but
that it's false. It's just like anytime you say
any
anything,
decent
there's always a.
any decent person that would understand that. So
That's true. That's true. I agree. But
now,
yeah,
before I forget, I want to go back, if I can, real quick
Yeah.
to something Chad said. I really liked how, Chad, you broke down that there's two elements to a melody, which is, the rhythm and then the pitch. And so something that I've found helpful when I've been trying to write a melody, I don't play an instrument, so I'm probably a little bit at a disadvantage when it comes to creating melodies. I have a MIDI keyboard, so I kind of try to poke around and create melodies. But if I'm struggling with that, what I'll do is I'll just play one note. I just whatever the key is, I'll just play the root note, and I'll just listen to the music and I'll play the rhythm just with one note, and then I'll go back and move the notes around and create an actual melody. So if that's something, if you're in the same place, you're just a producer, you can't play an instrument, or even if you can and you're not able to figure out a melody, what's going on when you're creating a melody is you're actually trying to do two things at once. You're trying to create the actual, melodic elements, the notes, but you're also trying to figure out the rhythm. So maybe just stick with figuring out the rhythm first and then figure out what the actual notes and the pitch should be.
That's great advice. That's actually what I would advise for a hook too. If you're stuck with a hook, just do the rhythm first. Literally, if what you said, or tap it out on your desk or something. Get the rhythm and then fill the notes in. It just makes it easier. Smaller steps at a time.
Or you can also, if you're playing the chord, you can try the different notes within the chord, right? So you can try the root and then try the third and then the fifth.
Yeah.
And then eventually, if you're kind of doing the rhythm, you might naturally start humming something else and sort of expand on it. No, that's a superb way to start doing melody for sure.
Also, to touch on what Chad just said as well, which is fantastic and I agree with, that's also a great way to figure out melodies in different song sections, because questions I've seen come up a lot recently are people like, I feel like I get stuck. I get maybe a melody for my verse, but then I don't know where to go with my chorus melody or vice versa. Taking what Chad just said, right? Be like, okay, one of them, you're starting on the first of the chord. Let's say you're in C major, you pick C, and your first verse melody is essentially the C below middle C, C3. Then, assuming the chorus starts on like with the same chord, C major chord at the beginning of the chorus, be like, all right, this one I'm going to just start on the fifth or on the third. Something as simple as that for your different song sections can be a great way to go as well, which is extra easy if you're maybe writing a melody on a keyboard, because you can visualize, right? You can be like, okay, I saw that my verse melody was kind of low, so now I'm going to move my hand up a little bit, and that's where I'm going to figure out my chorus melody, built maybe off the fifth of the chord instead of the first, like Chad was saying.
And also, don't underestimate the power of the pentatonic scale. Learning the pentatonic scale can be a great way to start experimenting with melody, because with the pentatonic scale, you can almost play anything over any chord progression within the key, and it sounds good. So you'll hear a lot of pop songs that are in pentatonic. So it's the 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, the note. So like in C, it would be C, D, E, G, A. If you play any chord progression in C, if you bang around on those notes, it will sound good. That's kind of a trick. And when I was in high school, that's how I learned to write songs and write melodies, was just banging out pentatonic melody.
This reference will surprise some people, but the guy from the 1975, actually, in an interview, they were asking him how he wrote his songs or whatever, and he's like, literally the pentatonic scale. Everything's built off of the pentatonic scale. So it made me think of that. As somebody who, this 1975 is 100% a guilty pleasure of mine.
Yeah.
I like them way more than anybody thinks that I would. I half expect to get like 5 emails from people like, you like the 1975. I never would have guessed that. And they'll enjoy it for sick reasons. But yeah, no, that's the pentatonic that's a great tip too. Also, kind of connecting to the original question a bit on like quality songs. I was gonna go off of something Chad said, but I feel like he fleshed it out really well, so I don't really have anything to add. But something else is like just well, I guess 2 things. One, I will say first because it's more connected to something Chad just said, but not only with pentatonic, but learning like the scale degrees in songs that you really like. So, for instance, a really powerful thing that you can almost always do is utilize a leading tone. And when I say a leading tone, yes, you can use the leading tone, which is the 7th scale degree, but also the other leading tone, because technically a leading tone is just one note that goes to another, leads to another. That's a half step apart. And you may notice in any major or natural minor key, you have 2 of them. The 7th to the 8 is the most common one and the most powerful one. But do not forget about the 3 to the 4, which is also super powerful. Whether it's like a 3 chord going to a 4 chord, which songwriter theory people know I'm in love with that. I just love that sound. It's just one of my favorite things in major keys. But just paying attention to those, because something, let's say you have a chord and you think it's kind of boring, think about adding, like, for example, in My Heart Will Go On, almost entirely the verse melody is built off of the tonic, the tonic, the tonic, that leading tone back up to the tonic, and it's great. And yeah, the rhythm's a part of it, and Celine Dion's voice is fantastic. But man, just knowing which notes are going to be extra powerful in the context of your key, like the 7th scale degree, because it so badly wants to resolve to 1, is also going to go a long way. And then just diving a little bit deeper. This is to me something that like we all sometimes just need to dive that one layer deeper, where it's like some people will complain that they feel like they have nothing new to say. There's nothing new under the sun. And that's true, but a lot of times where we get something interesting is just by diving a little deeper. So yeah, a breakup song is super boring and been done a million times. But a breakup song that happens immediately after she just broke up with you and you're feeling the specific emotions of betrayal and sadness, and you're thinking about how this might be the last time you ever see her, but you went into that day not thinking that. Now we're on to something, right? Because a lot of people can resonate with that. But it's much more specific than just like generic breakup song. You broke up with me at some point in the indeterminate past, and I'm sad, right? Like, yeah, that's boring. But if you dive more deeply into the specific, whether it's music theory wise or whether it's lyrically, and connecting to Chad's point too with the journaling, right? If you just take that 10 minutes to literally just journal out, get ideas out before you're worried about meter and all that sort of thing to actually write lyrics. I think a lot of times you'll be surprised if you're struggling with saying something new, you'll be surprised how interesting you can make something that technically isn't new just by diving a little bit deeper into your emotions, diving a little bit deeper into whatever it is you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when you have like a topic like a breakup, that's huge, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like saying a movie is a drama, right? Like okay,
Yes.
okay, like
Yeah. Or a
like,
rock song or an
yeah.
alternative song. Yeah.
So I'll talk about show don't tell in a minute, but
Ah,
I think if you can whittle your song down to a point in time and a specific place, so a who, a when, and a where, right? Like who's singing, who are they singing to, when is it happening, like, and where is it happening? So, like you said, breakup. I'm thinking, like, what if it's like after it happened and I'm crying in the Taco Bell drive-through? You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that could be more interesting because you have stuff to actually describe and you can paint the picture like Technic Tone said, and you can actually show us what's happening, like you don't say that I'm crying at Taco Bell, but you could say something about like the pain or the you know you had to clear your eyes because you couldn't see the board to order your
Heartbreak smells like tacos.
heartbreak spells. Yeah, good metaphor. um but you could also maybe from a perspective
Oh
you
my
could
goodness.
change the view, like maybe the song is written from the view of the cigarette that you're smoking after the breakup, right? Like write it as if the cigarette is talking, and what's the cigarette doing, right? Like it's
Playing with
helping.
point of view in general. I think so
Yeah.
many people just accept direct address and never even consider, like, try third person, right? I'm not saying try some second person can be trippy. I get that. Maybe it's hard to pull off, but like third person is a great way to go, especially if you want to give the appearance of an omniscient narrator that is unbiased. That can be a great way to go, right? Because you talking about your breakup have a bias. This just did, but with an omniscient narrator, you can play with other things. An example I think of for this, which I just remembered that I failed to put out a video I want to put out on the 25th anniversary of John Denver's tragic passing, which was 2 days ago. But I love John Denver, and Rocky Mountain High is a great example of he's absolutely talking about himself, but he's using third person, and it helps to just give the song a feel that it just wouldn't have if he was just being like,
Well,
I this, I that.
yeah. Well, the thing is most singers, and it depends on if you're writing songs for yourself to sing or if you're writing songs
Yeah.
for someone else to sing. If you're writing about something extremely depressing, if it's in first person, most singers don't want to they don't want to be self-deprecating, right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to listen
Vulnerable.
to someone whine. But if you're telling a story about someone else, vulnerable, yeah. But yeah, the third person takes that distance, and it lets you talk about things that may be actually about you, but it takes the spotlight off of you. You're just a narrator at that point.
Yeah. For sure.
No, that's really good. Very creative there. And that's something I probably haven't done enough in my music, is write from different points of view like that. I haven't thought too much about that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and one of the ways to make your songs less cliche is to use more imagery.
For sure.
And not cliche imagery. So not like red as a rose.
Dark like, and stormy night.
Yeah. Or even the term broken heart. Like that's a metaphor that doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
We know what it means, but what if you said something about like melting heart? Now all of a sudden you have this, it's fresh, right? Now you're like, that's a different metaphor.
Even as you said that, broken heart, I got literally no image in my head, but as soon as you said melting heart, I imagine like a metal-ish heart that is literally just melting from the top like a candle.
Yeah.
Vivid in general, just like vivid is one of my favorite words to think of when it comes to lyrics, especially, is always going for something vivid, meaning like something that like brings an image to mind, that gives a picture or paints a picture, whether that's via show don't tell or just via using words that just are more vivid. Because something like sad is a meaningless meh word.
Or
Can
blue.
you use it in a song? Absolutely. Or what?
Blue. I feel blue.
Yeah.
Like, don't say that. Nobody says that.
Yeah. Or even like
1945.
Yeah. Or even like pain. I'll give a. I like Breaking Benjamin quite a bit, and they have a song called Dear Agony. Imagine if it was called Dear Pain. I hate the song already.
Yeah.
Agony is technically a form of pain, but agony is a great, way more precise word, right? I can feel pain when, I don't know, for example, tonight I'm not getting to read my 7-month-old daughter before she goes to sleep. I'm a little brokenhearted about it. But like really, there's many other days I'm not going to actually lose sleep over it. I'm not in agony over it. Maybe a little bit of pain, or maybe, if I slap my hand on the table, that's pain. That's not agony though. Agony is a higher form and more precise version of pain. So just going that little bit deeper on like, okay, how do I pick a more vivid word for this thing, or a more vivid way to describe it, whether it's show don't tell, or whether it's just using words that, to Chad's point, haven't been like ripped away. The meaning hasn't been ripped away from them via overuse.
Cliches are invisible. And speaking of like quote. This is something that's big in like novel writing too, is like if you want to show more, include more of the 5 senses, right? Because we're so used to describing everything in terms of what we're seeing. Well, how can you use taste? That might be different than what people are used to experiencing in that situation. So that's how you can create a pattern interrupt that's seeing the world in a way that we don't normally see the world.
Yeah. Like, for example, if you talked about how like you could taste the blood in your mouth, that would work if you had just been punched in the face, right? That's going to be more effective than just talking about other things. Because like that's pretty vibrant. The idea of you can taste the blood in your mouth, that's not a thing that happens too often.
Or maybe even go deeper than that. Rather than saying you taste the blood, what are you actually tasting? You taste, metal, right? What does blood actually taste like? So obviously, that describing that probably could use a better word than metal, but that's kind of how to think about it.
Yeah, because off the top of our heads, we can have some
go a layer deeper.
Yeah,
because it's because nouns, right? They're kind of stand-ins for ideas sometimes, right? I mean, blood is obviously not just an idea, but it's more to it than that. It's a umbrella term, so how can you get deeper, I guess? Maybe that's not the best example, but that's kind of the way to think about it.
Theory of Surrender wrote "Iron on My Tongue." That's really cool.
There you go.
Christopher Severn says "Salty Tears." See, like I think "Salty Tears" is a little bit cliche too, because everybody, we know they taste like salt.
Yeah, the key is like trying to find a slightly different way to describe it. It's kind of like It's kind of like something I talk about maybe kind of often now, but just as a frame of reference, if I say white tiger, you probably just shrug and say like, "Yep, that's a thing." But if I say something like gray tiger or black tiger, all of a sudden you're like, "Ooh, what's that about?" Because that's not real, right? So with salty tears, that's just like, yes, they are salty. I know that. So you're like, there's no such thing as not salty tears. So if anything, inverting that and finding a way to have tears that aren't salty would be more interesting. And then of course you have to figure out why that is. But
the meaning, the symbolism, what do the tears symbolize, right? If it's right, if it's something, is it sad, or are they sad or happy tears, right? If they're happy tears or something, and it's like an upbeat song, maybe you'd say bubblegum tears or something. So two things that don't really go together. And again, this is just kind of off the top of my head. So if it's something sad, and replace salty with something sad that maybe doesn't even describe tears. They don't really relate. But putting those together, you're kind of tapping into symbolism there. And maybe that's a type of lyric writing that maybe you wouldn't prefer. I prefer more impressionistic lyrics, but that's just something to think about.
So the thing is we're like, salty is an adjective, right? And a lot of times we think adjectives are how we need to write more descriptively. Like we want to say something, is like blue car, salty tears. But I think where the meat of what's happening and what's even more powerful than adjectives is verbs.
For sure.
So what did those tears do? Like the tears scraped down her face, right? The tears danced off her cheek. Like verbs give us a sense of movement, and they give us a way that things move, whereas adjectives are just kind of like meh, right? Like we understand them, but it's not as powerful as the verb.
I would argue that like adjectives should be seen as I don't know if X factor is the word I want to go for, but something where like get your verb right first. And then if you can make it even more powerful with an adjective, great. But never, ever, to your point, use an adjective to compensate for your verb. Get your verb right. And then if you still feel like, ooh, I can make this even more profound with an adjective, great. Like adjectives aren't inherently bad, but they should never be the crutch. If anything, the verb is what to concentrate on. To the point
that's what adjectives are meant to do. Adjectives they're modifying something. So they're helping something that's already weak. So when I took a novel writing class, and one of the practices that they has to do in the class was just eliminate every adjective from your story. If there's an adjective, just take it out.
Exercise.
And it doesn't mean you can't ever use adjectives, but that was just kind of to get it in our minds. Like, if there's an adjective, that's a sign of potentially weak writing. And so if you're using adjectives, you're maybe could be choosing better words.
It's kind of like active versus passive verbs,
right?
Like,
so
realistically,
he ran really fast.
You can't always use active verbs, but like as a great exercise is to force yourself to only use active verbs, just to see how much and how used to we all are to using passive verbs. Like in our day-to-day speech, we almost always are using passive verbs, but when it comes to writing, I guess to connect to tips on how to tell if we're writing crap lyrics in general from Soul Vixen. and when to scrap a song, just to kind of connect to that question. That's a huge question that probably we could give 3 hours and still not sufficiently answer. But one thing is, look at your verbs first, right? Like literally, if you write it in a Word document or something, bold or underline all your verbs. Literally just do that and see, is this verb something that is moving, or is it super vanilla? If it's vanilla, maybe think about trying to see if you can swap it out. You can even literally just go to thesaurus.com, type that in, and go down the rabbit hole and see if you can find a more precise verb where all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what I mean to say. I said, I don't know, I said X, but there's this other verb that is like way more vivid, would be one thing. And then for writing crap lyrics in general, I feel like one of the hard things about lyrics is some of it kind of depends, right? So some people say like, oh, simple and conversational is good in lyrics. And I wouldn't say that's wrong, but I would say that it's wrong in that I don't agree that simple is good, but complex isn't good either. The truth, I think, is that it kind of depends. And it also depends on your voice, right? Some lyrics
I would say,
really
genre can play a part too.
Genre can play a part for sure, absolutely. So, like, for example, if you ever notice in like darker, like rock metal songs, they use symbolism and vague lyrics. I would argue too much. It goes too far, where it's like I can't even tell what the song's about anymore. It might be about nothing. But it does work within that genre better than it would for like a singer-songwriter John Mayer sounding song. If it was like, this whole song is really opaque to me, I don't know what it's saying, it would not work as well. So finding your own voice, I think, this may sound like a cop-out answer, Sol, but really working on what your voice is an important part. Because there are some things, for example, I stylistically don't like. And yet, so for example, I don't usually like any sort of pop culture reference, cutesy, anything. But I love the Bare Naked Ladies. And they have tons of tongue-in-cheek little jokes in songs. I love them. And what they are as lyricists, I would never want to be. And I'm not saying they're bad, right? It's just like, for me personally, or even the Taco Bell thing Chad said, right? That's the sort of thing I would never say it's bad, but it wouldn't feel genuine coming from me. So I think if I wrote it, it would be bad. But for some people, like the Bare Naked Ladies, they are great at that. And I wouldn't change a thing about that. So finding who you are specifically, I think, is a great way to go. And which is not to say that there isn't such a thing as crap versus good lyrics. Of course there is. But there is a lot where it's kind of finding, what is it that resonates with you? Do you like more vague? Do you like more personal? There's a lot to it.
I think so. How to tell if you're writing crap lyrics? Crap is so subjective, right? Like what's crap to Joseph might not be crap to me, or like there's no right or wrong way to do any of this. I think the question you need to ask is it exciting you, and do you like it? And is it communicating what you want it to communicate? And if it's not communicating what you want it to communicate, then you can adjust it. But as far as like being crap, I mean, how do you define that? Like, there are some songs that are like hit songs right now that I would consider to be crap, but they're hit songs. Like, I mean, you can argue about, is it good or bad, but you can't argue if it's a hit, right? Like, if it's a hit, it's a hit. When to scrap a song, though, I think is when you're not excited about it. I think if you are just like, I can't think of anything, like if it doesn't excite you to the point of where you want to like actually spend the time working on it, that's when you know to scrap it, right? Like it just, for me, that's it.
Also, let me just add on to that. I can't believe I, of all people, didn't think about this, since I talk about this all the time with frame-worthy lyrics. I personally like the test of, you don't have to literally put it in a frame, but literally look at your lyrics, read your lyrics as if it's poetry. So you are taking the lyrics just as poetry, where they're not going to be held up by the crutch that your melody might be, right? Because if you have a great melody, you can sing some really pedestrian lyrics and everybody will buy it just because the melody feels so powerful. right?
Yeah.
The melody and the music can be really manipulative to the point that like a lot of people are like, oh, I love this song, it means so much to me, and you're like, dude, it's about like this horrible whatever thing. The song is not about what you think it is, but the melody manipulates them into thinking that, which is not me deriding melodies or anything like that. But I do think a great test is separate out your lyrics. Literally just imagine if this was poetry on the wall in a frame and my friend, my mom, my spouse, whatever, came by and they just read the lyrics. There was no melody to elevate the lyrics. There was nothing. Do they still hold up just as poetry? If the answer is yes, then your lyrics are probably good. If the answer is no, maybe it needs more work. I say maybe because admittedly the standard is a little lower for lyrics. I personally don't like that and try to hold myself to the standard I just said, but I get
So,
that not everybody is obsessed about
Jo-
that thing.
Joseph, you said something about lyrics being simple.
Yeah.
And I think what lyrics should be is believable to the point where you believe that the singer would say it.
Yeah.
So it has to be something that's authentic to the singer. And I also think there's a difference between being conversational and being simple, right?
Agreed.
Am I able to share my screen, Reagan?
Ooh, I'm not sure. I've never.
Let me try it.
Let's see. Do you have a share your screen option?
Yeah.
I think I do, so I imagine he
Okay,
does.
I guess you can.
There's a present button at the bottom.
I wanna
Okay.
look at some lyrics by Jason Isbell. Oh, Google would like to record this computer screen and audio. I might have
Yeah,
to
I mean
come
that
back to this.
that made me think of. I mean, just like talking about like popular like big songs that like Richmond, North of Richmond recently blew up, and I wouldn't say those are lyrics I would frame on my wall. I wouldn't say it's poetry, but because of his brand and his genre and who he was singing about and who he was singing to, it resonated with a lot of people, and it seemed very just regular guy, in the country singing the song about, lower class versus upper class, that those were good lyrics, and those wouldn't be lyrics I would write. Those probably wouldn't be lyrics I'd hang on my wall, but they can still resonate depending on those other factors: genre, audience, who the singer is.
I
So looks
think
like we
to
did get
connect
your screen here.
both of the points, including what Chad said, I feel like your lyrics need to be true. Like in all
Yeah.
senses of the word, except for the sense of literally true. So I say that because, like, for example, you can tell a very true story via a parable. That isn't literally true. It's not literally what happened, but via the parable, you're communicating truth. And a part of that is the true you. And a part of that. So from him, that song worked because you knew that came directly from the heart in a way that even if I agree with, I haven't listened to the whole song, but the parts I did, I'm like, oh yeah, great. But I still like, it just isn't my style of writing. So if I wrote it, or if I sang it, if I did a cover of it, it just wouldn't feel right. Even if I do believe all of what it is, because it just isn't my artistic voice. It's not true to me, even if I do believe all those things, in the sense that it's just not, it's just, there is a thing of like, you as an artist have an identity and it needs to kind of fit within that. And you can have a lot of variety within that. But everybody has a voice. And the only thing that makes all of us special is literally just what our voice is, right? It's the only thing unique about us. The fact that I play piano, or piano is my main featured instrument most of the time, isn't special. Five for Fighting has already done that. The Fray has already done that. Tons of bands have done that. Certainly guitar, that's even more so, right? It's even harder because it's like 99% of songwriters are guitarists, first and foremost. What makes you special is your artistic voice, which comes from the true you. Did I just
Chad,
get a
looks like
screen come up and then
yeah, looks
leave
like
or
we
something?
have your screen here, Chad.
Yeah. So this
There.
is a song by Jason Isbell called "King of Oklahoma,"
Mhm.
and I just think the lyrics are so just conversational. So we'll take the copper from the work site, meet me there at midnight. They ain't got a camera or a guard. Write my own prescription if I can't get a fix, son. Shit's about to get real hard. Molly don't believe me. She says she's going to leave me. The kids won't even know my name. Put a gallon in the step side. With a little help by morning, I won't feel no pain. Never thought I'd wind up this far behind. Just a couple years back, we had it made. I was emptying my bladder on a 20-foot ladder, should have climbed down and found myself some shade. Doctor took a quick look and I got out the checkbook and left with a pocket full of pills. Now my back's still hurting and I'm too weak for working and I can't keep up with all the bills. She used to wake me up with coffee every morning and I'd hear her homemade house shoes slide across the floor. She used to make me feel like the king of Oklahoma, but nothing makes me feel like much of nothing anymore. I just think that's very everyday language, but not simple in the way of like,
100%.
I knew I loved you from the very start. You had the deepest part of my heart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think maybe a way to look at it is something. So for example, for the longest time I
Also,
would have this
yeah.
argument, shocking no one, with people where some people would be like, "Oh, you like The Office? The Office is dumb," and I would say, "Wait a second. The characters in The Office, many of them are dumb. The writing and the humor is smart. There is a difference. There is dumb humor and there's dumb characters. You can have both. I just watched Anchorman recently for the second time to give it another shot. I would argue that both the humor and the characters are dumb in that. Like all the jokes are pretty much just like, hey, they said a weird thing that makes no sense, rather than like intelligent character humor that for the most part is made up of shows like The Office. So there's a difference between a dumb character and dumb writing or dumb like humor. And in the same way, I think probably simple is one of those things where like you can have refined, quote, good writing that comes across as plain, but there's brilliance underneath it.
right.
And then you can have just straight up plain and boring, which is what you were talking about with your very short example.
But I think my point is sometimes people think they have to write extremely poetically and almost
Mhm.
like they have to create this, like they kind of write around what they're trying to say, and they're like, I want the listener to put themselves in my song. You know, I want the listener to complete it. And actually the way that your listener completes the song is by the images and them experiencing it in their mind. Because if they can see it, they can feel it, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I just wanted to show that song because I think it's just really good, like plain everyday language for lyrics.
Yeah, I would like the title too, because the title itself is kind of a pattern interrupt because you think of King and Oklahoma are kind of
Yes.
contrasting. You think of Oklahoma, you think of, middle class, lower class, regular people, country, and then you're calling himself the king of Oklahoma. Like immediately that creates an interesting,
For sure.
disconnect in your mind. You're like, what's that about?
Yep.
That's a great title. Great
Yeah.
title for sure.
Jason's a great writer.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is another great example of I would never write anything like this, but it's great. Like it's well crafted lyric.
But to your point, Joseph, I think that's totally true, is you have to find what makes you like what makes you you, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
you have to figure out what's your unique thing. Um, so Theory of Surrender says, I don't think it's up to you whether or not your audience relates. You can only do so much.
I agree
I
with that,
I
actually.
I agree with that, but at the same time, if you write in such a poetic or metaphorical way that your listener can't figure out what the song is about, like it, they're not they're not attracted to the lyrics at that point. They might be attracted to like melody, or it might be other parts of the song. But from a lyrical perspective, if you make your listener think, they will stop feeling. And the second they think, you've lost them, because you want them to not do a math problem. You want them to feel whatever you're trying to communicate. And nobody needs practice being vague. We could all write vague songs like that. What we need practice at is trying to be specific and writing in a descriptive and powerful way that we can control some of the emotion that we're communicating. So I don't think it's completely out of our hands. I mean, people can choose if they like it or not, but you still have the ability to be the one who's communicating something in a very specific way, if that makes sense.
I think too, though, you can have both, right? So I don't think you have to sign up for like simple and straightforward or more poetic. I think you can have both, right? That's where layers come in, which to me, like I think I mentioned this to one of you in a stream, and there's another just theory I have going. But I think the highest form of art is when it works in different layers. So like if it's a true parable, right? If it's a beautiful story that is also true, that's like the epitome of art to me. If it works both on a symbolic level and a literal level. And whether anybody agrees or disagrees with that specific theory, I think there's something to be said for you can have different layers, right? And there's just like to the back to the audience point, I think you'll just find a different audience, right? So if you're aiming for a pop audience, then I completely agree with everything you just said. But like there's also there's an audience for any type of lyrical style, just like there is for any musical style. So to Theory of Surrender's point, I think it's better to write what's true to you and hope that people can resonate. You're probably better off doing that than you are thinking about how to make people resonate. I think it depends, right? If you're trying to write a pop song or you're trying to get somebody to cover your song and all that, then I think that changes. But as an individual artist, if you just care about making stuff that resonates with you, I think that's probably the best place to start, which isn't to say don't take feedback or anything. But
Right. I mean, if it
I think
resonates
just
with
in general, we obsess sometimes too much with like, well, what do the people want? What's pop radio doing? And maybe I'm on the other extreme where I say, who cares? And I think there's some discussion to be had, right? Maybe, if your song doesn't have to be 5 minutes and a minute and a half is pointless, then yeah, maybe trim it down to 3.5. But there's always going to be that tension, right? Between like, you got to be you. And some of us are going to lean more the poetic, some are going to lean more simple. And then to our earlier conversation about like doing both when it comes to efficient and quick songs versus taking a while and really crafting every bit. I think the same can be true for lyrics, right? You can have some that's like a really crafted lyrics that has layers and is maybe pretty vague. And people have to pay attention to really get what you're saying. And then also having some that are really straightforward. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Depending on how you write your music, you're going to attract different kinds of people. So if you're writing in a more on the nose fashion, then you would attract people that prefer that kind of music. Because I know people like that. They don't like impressionistic lyrics or lyrics where it's hard to figure out what the meaning is. I know other people that are the opposite. So whatever type of music you create, you'll just attract the people that like that. What was that?
And some people just assume lyrics are brilliant if they don't understand them, like Nirvana fans. To be clear, I like Nirvana. But Nirvana is one of those bands that kind of irritates me, where like if you talk to their fans, they will all tell you, and again, I like Nirvana, so I am a fan, I guess, but the typical Nirvana fan will tell you two things at the same time. Their songs are brilliant and you wouldn't get them, and I also don't know what they're about, which I'm always like, I don't think you can have both, buddy. But
so I love Technic's question here, but I want to comment on the on the abstract thing. I think what's funny is I will see songwriters and talk to songwriters that are like, help me write better songs, but they just want to write nonsense lyrics that like they are just sort of like floaty clouds, like there's nothing there. It's like, well, I don't know how to teach you to make that better, because you could literally just take random lines on the internet and throw them together and do what someone's doing, right? But I think if you want to improve from a craft perspective, the key is kind of related to what Technic's asking, is how do you learn how to communicate the emotion that you want to communicate, right? So as far as like lyrics will suggest certain emotions, how do you reflect it in the music? You have to stop and think, what does frustration feel like? So frustration feels like banging your head on the wall. So maybe the music is like doom, ka-ka-doom, ka-ka-doom, ka-ka-doom. Or maybe frustration is being stuck. So maybe it's like you kind of start, but then you kind of back off, like those types of things. So it comes down to this concept of prosody, where how does the structure support the content of the lyric? Theory of Surrender says buttload of eighth notes. Yeah, that might work.
I feel like that would be
Yeah, or
more
if it's
relentless.
you could
But
use a
but
bunch
it
of
depends how it's done.
glitchy effects on the production side of things.
And
Yeah.
don't change your chord, right? Like just stick to some dissonant chord and just like stay there and have that rhythm. That would feel frustrating.
Yeah, build
Or have a
tension.
chord progression that doesn't really go much of anywhere.
Right.
So yes, the frustration is like you're on the 1 chord and then you go to the 2, which isn't even that common, right? 1 to 2 doesn't happen all that much. It's kind
Right.
of it's not like a weird transition, but it's certainly, if you look at the pop radio charts, you're not going to see it very often. You'll see like 2, 5 to 1 all the time, but 1 to 2 is kind of like a weird, you would think it would happen all the time, but it usually doesn't. But even
Thought
that could
most
seem
people
frustrating because the song's not actually going anywhere. You want it to go somewhere. What was
I
that?
thought most people went 1 and 2 most of the time.
No. Oh my goodness.
What is-
That's wow.
I
Wow.
have 4 kids.
Yeah. I don't know if they're old enough for that to count as an
Well,
excuse yet.
once
Oldest
you
is
be
5,
you
right?
immediately you start once you become a dad, you immediately just get this inherent ability for dad jokes, right? I guess so.
Yeah.
Hey,
Also, since I promised talking about some of these questions we got beforehand, we probably should
Is there a specific
You're
one we
welcome,
missed?
Theory of Surrender. For your video on chord progressions. Not sure which one you're talking about, but you're welcome. Glad it helped. That's so funny. I wonder what the story is there. Anyway, we want to go through some of these questions we got beforehand.
Yeah, you mean the ones that we had talked about
Yeah.
covering? Yeah, I know I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of get into how we can go about finishing songs faster. I think that was a lot of these questions were. So here's one. So you had done a survey asking your audience what kind of their biggest struggles were. So this person said, I have millions of ideas, good ones too. I'll get the hook down or a killer riff, and somehow the song always remains incomplete. I get discouraged, I think, at some point in the process and lose focus. And then right after that, someone else asked, right now I'm struggling to finish songs. I have several song starters, sections, and ideas that can be turned into songs. And I get a lot of questions like this too, like stuck in an 8-bar loop. How do you get out of that and actually finish a song? Or right, maybe you've got the song down, but you're just having a hard time recording the vocals. So how do you go about finishing more
Tell me, how do you
songs
do that?
and speeding up your workflow? So what are your guys' best tips?
I think the first comment that you have where they said they were effing good, like I have effing good ideas. I think sometimes, for me personally, I think they're so good that I'm afraid to mess them up. Right? So it's like, oh, I have to wait until I can really do it justice, right? And I think that's a mistake thinking that way because it's a song. You can always rewrite it, right? Like you can always like change it later. So just don't hold on to it like this is my best idea. But I think for me is if
Ideas are cheap.
ideas are cheap, but I think the process is you have to stop and think, and this is where you can do some free writing. Like if you have like a title or you have a line, it's like, well, what does that line mean? Just like free write, just write down anything that comes to your mind. Um, if you have a title, look up the opposites of every word that's in the title. Look up synonyms, similar words to the title. Look up words that rhyme with the words in the title. Like create this lyric palette that might spark some inspiration. And I think just write it, and then because there's really two parts to the creative process. There's creation and there's the critiquing and editing part. I think if you pull in the editing part too soon, it kills the creation. So try to create it so you actually have something to edit, right? So I think yeah, don't want to mess up what started off great. Totally. Someone said write an instrumental. That's actually a good idea though. Like if you have a sense of what the emotion of the song is, make some music that has that emotion, because sometimes it's easier to write and top line to something than it is to just come up with a cold idea, right? Like the music may give you something and you may just hum a melody and you may be like, shit, that's really good, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm strongly this maybe is not true for everybody, but even as somebody who like did poetry as a kid and stuff. So I'm kind of a weird person where like most people start as a musician or as a poet. I really my answer is I kind of started as both, and then at some point I'm like, hey, I should put this together. But I think it's just more intuitive for most of us as humans to listen to music and say, what is that about, than to go the other way around. So you don't do what works for you, obviously. But especially for people struggling to finish songs like lyrics and music, a lot of times I feel like it's because they do something like they write lyrics and then they ask themselves, okay, how do I make music that pairs with this? And I think that certainly is doable, but it's way harder than making music and asking yourself, what does this feel like it already is about? Now, the weakness is that, like, maybe, if you write some of the same sounding music over and over again, you're going to write the same thing. There's weaknesses to that too that can be remedied in a bunch of different ways. But when stuck, when in doubt, start with music first. And then also, like, I would even encourage, I haven't done this, full transparency, but as I'm saying it, I think I should do it. Literally, if we all wrote down, here are my ways to get unstuck or hacks to get unstuck, and then we just revisit that list over and over, it's a great way to go. Because I have like one in my head, right? If I'm stuck, it could be something like, let's say I've written a verse and I have a chord progression and the whole verse is done. I don't know where to go with the chorus. And I keep trying to start with the 1 chord. And I'm like, no, in the chorus, I'm going to start with a 5 chord or a 6 chord or something different and just arbitrarily pick a chord and try that instead. Or maybe I started the song with a piano riff. That doesn't mean that I have to continue writing the song at the piano, right? I could go over to the guitar to write the chorus, or I could start with a melody first in the chorus. And then outlining, I think, is a really, I feel like a lot of us miss
Yeah.
that. We're like, we get lost because we didn't give ourselves a roadmap.
Yep.
And if you give yourself a roadmap, then you know what each song section's job is, and it's going to be way easier. And a lot of times we get stuck because we write a first verse, we write a chorus, and then we're like, well, now what? I said all I have to say. Well, that's the problem, is that maybe you said too much in the first verse and you needed,
Yep.
or you just haven't figured out what the second verse needs to say. And that's the first step, is knowing what its job is and then try to execute on that job.
Yeah. So what would a song outline look like? If you're sitting down, I'm going to outline a song. What would that
Yeah.
look like?
So some people call them song maps just to avoid confusion. I'm not sold on the term song map. I'll use it interchangeably with outline. I think outline is more precise, but for anybody who has heard of song maps, it's the same thing. Really, it's just like have a 1-line summary of what each section is trying to do. Like, that's really all it is, right? You're saying, in my first verse, I introduce the problem, right? Obviously, you have to say what the problem actually is. Don't say I introduce the problem. That's not very helpful. And then in the chorus, like, probably it's just your title, right? Just specifically, what is it you're trying to communicate? If you can't communicate it in 1 sentence, then maybe that's the problem, that you can't communicate what the job of that song section is in 1 sentence.
So,
Yeah.
theory of surrender, and you put it up there. What if you said all you have to say? Could you just say it again? Well, you could, but that's boring, right? So if you literally can't go anywhere after your first verse, then you don't have a song. You have part of something. But most of the time, what you need to do is look at what do you have in that first verse and think, can I go deeper into what this is and pull some of it out to the second verse. And as far as like repeating the first verse and the second verse, like what is the Harry Styles song, Watermelon Sugar? I think that's the song. Literally, the second verse is the first verse. So like you can do it, but why? I think
I didn't know that. I like that song even less now. Oh my goodness.
but to Joseph's point, like one easy way to kind of outline a song is I call it like the you, me, us structure. So like in your first verse, if you're singing to someone else, you sort of put it in their perspective. And then the chorus relates to their perspective. And then in second verse, you put it in like me. So what is my my perspective on the thing, the perspective, and then chorus again, and then in your third verse or your bridge, you have it. How does this affect us? So
Right.
That's a kind of a template that you can use. You can also use like
Time, like past,
time.
present,
Yep,
future.
past, present,
So
future. But you don't have to have it in that order. So you could start your
yeah,
first verse present, second verse could be past,
first
bridge
verse
or
could be
third verse could be
future that you aspire to, and then
yep,
the chorus
something
is
you
what's
want.
blocking you from getting there, and then the
Yeah.
second verse is how you got to your present that you're not that happy with.
What
Yeah.
about saying it again differently? See, that's the thing that's interesting about songwriting is that's still boring because we're not getting any new information. We're just hearing different words that are telling us the same thing. Sometimes we worry so much about the words that we forget the message. And that's what we need to watch out for as songwriters is a lot of times it's not about the individual words. It's about how is it communicating. Also, Joseph, I like to do the so, but, therefore.
Yeah.
Um, so, like, so here's the situation, verse one, verse two, but here's
Yeah.
some conflict. And then the next part would be, therefore, here's what I'm going to do, or here's how things are going to work out. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I like to use that.
Yeah, I really
It
like.
also depends what you mean by. Sorry, I'll just to touch on that real quick. It does depend too what you mean by saying it again differently. I think if you're talking about the same coin but you're giving the other side of that coin, that's not really saying it again differently. That is saying something different. You're just looking at the same coin. So I think that can be fine if you do it right. But if you literally say the same exact thing with no information, to Chad's point, then that is a problem. So it kind of depends what you mean by saying it again differently. But sorry, go ahead, Reagan.
I was just gonna say I also like applying the like 3-act structure to lyric writing,
Yes.
whereas you have the first act, which is your current situation, how things are, probably not an ideal situation, right? To make it interesting. So you want to get somewhere. Then you have act two, whereas you're on some kind of journey, right? You're in some kind of transition going from where you were to
Rising
where you want to
action.
be. Yeah. Then you have the final act, which is the resolution. Either you got there, or you didn't, right? The climax of the song. So either you succeeded or you didn't succeed. And that's what, that way you have a direction you're going in. And that's something that just is kind of timeless.
Yeah. Think too about if there's a big reveal you want to have, because sometimes if you have like a piece of information that you kind of want to withhold till the end because it's like impactful, um, trying to figure out how do you have a this might be a don't do this for your first song, but like later in your songwriting when you're like trying to figure out new ways to do things, have the challenge of there's this very important thing. Like, for example, this would be like a classic one of those, but the like, oh, I was the murderer the whole time, right? That's a reveal you need at the end. If like you're talking about this murder in this song for whatever reason, and you're talking about how tragic it is that your spouse died or something. I know this is getting really dark. I'm sorry, but like, and then it's revealed at the end that you're actually the one who did it. And whether it's because you have psychotic episodes or Jekyll and Hyde, or whether you're just a terrible person and the whole time, whatever it is, like finding a way to tell a story in a way that like you actually do save that important piece of information for the end for that big reveal can be another thing that you can do. That is not a
Yeah.
hack. I think that's a more advanced way of doing things. But for anybody who's been writing songs for a while, I find sometimes throwing that sort of thing in there to be.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of this song. I think it's called "A Thief" or "Thief" by Reliant K. I don't remember if it comes at the end, but the singer's talking about a thief that basically stole his relationship, but then at the end he reveals it was him. He was the thief that stole it.
Awesome. Technic Tone, you put up it said, I'm currently writing a song that's turned into a duet. And I think the key word here is perspective, right?
Yep.
Like you're changing the perspective, which is not saying the same thing
For sure.
in a different way. You might be singing about the same topic, but it's from a different perspective. So there is new information there. So if you want to really get into what we're talking about, how you develop a song and how you use like to develop the story or the have it gain emotional weight. If you have Pat Patterson's book, Writing Better Lyrics, which is like the super well known, it's probably not a secret to most of you, but chapter 6 talks about productive repetition. And that he just has a great way of thinking about it. So just like, I think that's one of the most powerful chapters in the book.
Is that the one with the 3 blocks that they
The
just get
boxes.
bigger every time? I was
Yep.
literally thinking about the same thing. I was impressed you knew which chapter it was off the top of your head. I'm
I
like,
teach
man.
it. I did.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
teach it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, that's a if you have that book, or if you don't have it, you should get it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit heady. You don't read it front to back. You just take
No.
it chapter by chapter. But um, it's called "Writing Better Lyrics" by Pat Pattison. And I
That's
don't
like
know
an interesting point, though. Like, if you want to learn something, the best way to learn something is to actually to teach it. I think
100%.
they've done studies like, right, you think, oh, the best way is to do it. Well, actually, like, you retain even more when you actually are teaching it than even just doing it.
100%. Both with Songwriter Theory and when I became
You don't have to start a YouTube channel, but maybe you find someone in your life that you could that is also interested, and you get together with them and collaborate and teach them what you know, and you can also learn from them what they know. That's one of the fastest ways to improve.
Or just go on
Yeah.
Joseph's channel and argue with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in the comments where I may or may not see it. Or it may be a while.
So
Yeah.
I think so far that's all. I think that's mostly all been like lyric related when we talk about how to get unstuck. Any like tips for the music creation part? So maybe you've got the music done for a verse, then how do you create a chorus and then a second verse, and how you actually go on like finishing that song?
Strong, it depends, like everything else, I guess. But I mean, there was enough silence. I guess I'll answer first this time. But so many different ways. But I guess I'll just give a few that come to mind. One of my favorites is literally just, let's say you either have the same chord progression or you do have the chord progression melodically. Going back to what Chad said earlier, the whole just move where you start the melody, right? Your first verse started on the 1, have the chorus start on the 5. And your bridge, you just be like, huh, in the bridge, I'm going to start on a non-chord tone this time. Maybe you start on a 5 chord, but the melody starts on the 6th scale degree or something. You don't have to get that heady about it where you're thinking about scale degrees. For those of you that, as soon as I mentioned music theory, you're half asleep. But just like thinking about something as pedestrian and ridiculous as, hey, I started with a C major chord in my first verse. I'll start with a G major chord in my chorus. Can be a great way to go. Just changing where your melody is, and then also just changing the way you approach a section. And then another thing, just because it's one of those things I feel like I don't talk about as much as I probably should. I should probably do a video on this because people sometimes seem to get confused over like connecting song sections. And that's where basic theory can really come in handy, where you're like, okay, your verse ends on a 5 chord. So don't always just do the natural next chord, right? Like we shouldn't always follow those chord charts where it's like 5 most powerfully leads to 1, but 5 also commonly goes to a 6. That's good to know. And it's good to fall back on. Don't just always do that. But when lost, if your verse is ending on a 5 chord, so G major in the key of C major, just knowing like, okay, if my verse ends on a 5 chord, the 2 chords that are pretty safe bets for my chorus to start with, because that's the next chord, is the 1. That's the obvious choice because it's a chorus. So starting on a 1 chord, that happens all the time. Or you can change it up, make it a little different, and have it go to the 6th chord. Or you can intentionally not do those things because you've done that too much. So that's where I think theory can come in and help you, where you understand things like, oh, I landed on a 3 chord. Where do I go from here? Well, if you know what chords lead naturally to other chords, ooh, 3 to a 4 is a great way to go. But yeah, so I guess those 3 answers. But
I think for me, when thinking back to before I knew a lot of theory and before I really studied this stuff, I think I just copied songs that I like. Like you can't copyright a chord progression, right? Like unless it's free fallen, that one might be. Um, but like if you don't understand theory, because some people are new and they don't know all the scale degrees, and like everything that Joseph said makes complete sense to me. Some of you are probably glazed over and passed out. That's okay. Joseph can teach you. Um, but if you somebody so I was teaching a class in person last night, and somebody asked me, do I have a cheat sheet on what chords to use when I want to communicate a certain emotion? And I honestly said no, because different chords do different things in context. Everything focuses on context. But what I told this person was, listen to a song that has the mood that you're going for and learn that chord progression. And then write something to that chord progression. And now all of a sudden you have built your sort of chord vocabulary in a way. So stealing chord progressions from other songs is a great place to start. It's not the end all, and that's not where you end, but at least you can get some ideas of, oh, if I want to make a song sound like worrisome, I know what to do because I've done that before, right? You kind of have to know where to find stuff. And for those of you who are like electronic music producers and like, or keyboard players, you mess around with your keyboard enough to where you know where the sounds are when you want a certain sound, right? That's the same with chords, and the same with sort of getting feel in music, is you start to have this vocabulary because you've learned it by doing it, and you've let someone else figure out the theory, but you can just learn what works.
And you can go even one step deeper than taking a whole chord progression. If there's just a magic moment in a song where you're like, I don't know what they did there, but that's the moment of the song that I have goosebumps or whatever, go look up what it is, right? Whether it's maybe can read sheet music, great, do that. Maybe some of you don't know how to read sheet music. That's okay. Go to something like what's it called? The guitar chords place.
So I can't remember.
Ultimate Guitar. Thank you.
Is it Ultimate Guitar? Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimateguitar.com, you can look up the song and just see generally what like that chord transition was, or even you can try to bang it out on a piano or guitar until you can figure out maybe it's not a chord transition that you just were like, ooh, I felt that. But even just pick a moment from a song where like, that gave me goosebumps. Let me drill into that specifically. How did they do that? What did the melody do? What did the chord do? And then try to figure out what part of that gave you goosebumps. I think my love of the 3 chord to the 4 chord came from, I think, a combination of writing a lot, but also like being like, I hear this sometimes in songs and I just love that sound. What the heck is that? So yeah, it's a great point.
So so when you're going from the 3 to the 4, are you doing that in the middle of a chord progression, or are you doing that like at the start of a chord progression?
I don't know that I've ever done that at the start, but now that you say that, I want to try it.
That,
but usually it's a highlighted moment. Usually it's like a point that I want to make a statement, probably, because it just has a specific sound I like a lot.
If you started on the 3 and went to the 4 and you just alternated that would be in the Phrygian mode.
That's true. Which I love for rock music, but I don't love for singer-songwriter, if that makes sense. I actually write a lot of Phrygian when I'm writing the rock stuff I do. Yep. I never use Phrygian. I never even really use minor with my singer and songwriter stuff, but I only use minor and I only use Phrygian when it comes to the harder rock stuff. 4/4 minor is a great one too. Maybe at risk of becoming cliched, but still good.
Yeah, I was also gonna say that like what Technic Tone says here too. Like you can like pick and choose parts from different songs that you like, especially with this, but they're not parts that are copyright that can be copyrighted, like the chords and the rhythm.
So actually, we were talking about melody before. That's a really good way to practice writing melody too, is just take the rhythm of other songs and apply different pitches to it.
Yeah.
Because nobody owns the rhythm, right? Like, so you can totally make a new melody based off the same rhythm structure, which is fun.
Especially if you love the feel. Sometimes, like, actually, I'm going to mention the 1975 twice in one thing. But there was actually one time I was like, I want to write a catchy song. And I think I was listening to, I don't know, the sound over and over again. So I just straight up looked up what is the tempo of that song and did a similar beat and built a song off of it. Because I'm like, this song is stuck in my head. I love it. I feel, actually, I will say the lyrics are very, very good. They're not my style, but they're very, very good. I feel like the 1975 is the epitome of like it's hidden smart stuff. Like lyrically, they're very smart, but a lot of people probably don't even notice. but anyway. So yeah, steel and drum beat can 100%, especially if you're looking for feel, right? Like I would never sit at a piano and improvise a funk song. I just never would do it. But if you just go look up a drum beat that's funk and you improvise to it, guess what type of song you're writing? You are writing a funk song, because like you can't not play with the. Most of us can feel and follow, even if it's not something that you would come up with yourself, which is another great way. When
So
stuck.
I'm going to say something controversial, and that is if you have an 8-bar loop, you already have a full song. So this is
I
just
agree. I agree with that. You could make a whole song out of an 8.
Whole song, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a little screenshot from a video I'm actually working on, which is how to build a full song out of an 8-bar loop. And you can see on the side there, I'm walking through different arrangement like techniques and tricks you can use to actually make an 8-bar loop interesting. And so what I'm kind of showing here in this picture is I started out with just like an 8-bar loop. So imagine like all these different tracks all collapsed for like the chorus. And then I just copied that out over the rest of the song for different song sections. So I created the arrangement at the top here, so where the different sections are. And then I decided, okay, so this is where the bass will be. This is where the chords will be. This is where the drums will be. And so at different sections, you just take away or add different parts from that 8-bar loop. And the only section of the song where all the elements from that original 8-bar loop are present is the final chorus, because that's the climax of the song. And so then from there, right, I mean, that's going to sound really boring. So there's some arrangement tips you can do from, especially like if this is maybe a little more electronic music focused, but with using filter automation, that's what you see kind of here. You can see there's a filter automation going on there where the high frequencies are being cut out and then being brought in for the choruses. So the verses, which are smaller, lower in energy, I'm filtering those out, and then it opens up. But then a bunch of other stuff, right? You can add in drum fills. You can, cut out different elements between the different sections. That's something I like to do. So instead of just having your bass and your drums from your verse run right into your chorus, you can like cut out the last, quarter note ish of your drums and your bass, and that drop in energy can create a sense of movement and really distinguish those sections. You can change octaves, so you can have I think I did that with the little ARP I had here. I had it go up an octave for the chorus. So even though it's the same pattern, it's up an octave. And so there's a bunch of different things I kind of go through here, adding in different sound effects, different modulation effects, automating actual parameters inside the synths you're using. So these are different ways you can take an 8-bar loop, which might sound boring, and by using these different arrangement ideas, you can actually make it interesting. And then the next step from there to make it even better would be you actually change the chords now, right? So if you have, instead of just having the same chords through your whole song, you can maybe change the chords from one verse to a chorus and so on. But the point here is we don't have to make things too complicated, right? Depending on the song, it might work just having the same chords all the way through, and you just focus on different little arrangement techniques to make it interesting.
So yeah, so if you have the same chord progression throughout the whole song, that means you have to add contrast melodically, right? So that means your rhythms have to be different in each section. Your pitch range should be different in each section. So because it's super effective to use the same chord progression throughout the whole song, and especially in like more pop or like synth-based music, a lot of times things are based on loops like that. Christopher said, Reagan, please play it. I was kind of hoping you'd play it too, honestly, but I don't know if it's for public consumption or not.
I could probably play
when the video comes out.
Clip here. So this isn't edited. So this is just the video portion. I have like a voiceover. So I'm not sure where.
Do you know where
I'm
the
playing
actual?
it,
Yeah.
because this is like showing me like constructing it. Because I was just doing this on the fly while I was recording. I don't know if there's something.
We can't hear it, or I can't hear it.
No, it's not feeding through.
Yeah, there's a little sneak peek. I don't know if did that come through?
It did not.
It didn't come through? Okay. So
No.
I guess it's not playing the audio from this for some reason. So
well, you're figuring that out.
There'll be a video. There'll be a video coming out on my YouTube channel where
so subscribe to Orpheus Audio Academy. Unless you're there already, in which case stay subscribed. But yeah, I think there's going to be a theme that I guess I've said it multiple times now, but the key is, again, change it up. So there are those of us that maybe are afraid of 4-chord songs, which is too far one way, or 2-chord songs. And then there are those that never go past 4-chord songs. And I think both is wrong, might be a strong word, but I'll say it. Both are wrong. If you do both of those all the time, no, stop. Right. So if you're somebody who leans towards complex and think about the theory of everything, a good challenge for me is to go do something simple. So like I had several songs where I forced myself to, I do have a 2-chord song. It's actually one of the few songs that are actually out and available for people to listen to. But the whole song is literally just the 1 and the 4. And it just builds the whole time. And I used my wife's voice for a hot second. And so it just builds over time. But it started as a challenge to myself of, can I make a whole interesting song out of 2 chords? Right. Because I knew that a weakness of mine, or a thing that I needed to challenge myself with, is to simplify. But I think what maybe doesn't get talked about enough is I think a lot of people lean towards all simple all the time. And I would say that's bad too. So can you just use the same stock chord progressions over and over again? Yes. Are a lot of successful artists like that? Yes. Should you do that? And does it limit you as a songwriter? Well, no and yes. Or it does limit you, and no, you probably shouldn't do it. So for all of us, it's like trying to figure out where are we on that spectrum. And I think pushing ourselves in both directions of, how do I get simpler? So if you're somebody who's stuck on a song, be like, no, I have my 8-bar loop. That is my song. I'm just determining that that's a song. I'm going to stop trying to write different chord progressions and do something different and try to feel smart. No, I'm just going to go stick with it. But then if you're somebody who only does 8-bar loops, you know what? My challenge to you is go out and don't do an 8-bar loop song, and actually try to figure out a different chord progression, have a different chord progression in a pre-chorus and then a different one in the chorus. Maybe even use the relative minor key in the bridge, or do something you've never done before. And one more thing on this. Whenever stuck, sometimes start a song with an arbitrary challenge. Right. So whether that's like, I want to write a killer bass line, or whether that's I've never written a song in 3/4. Right. And maybe some people have literally never thought about that. And they're like, holy crap, I've never written a song in 3/4. And that's like the second most common key signature. Right. So like, there's no reason for us to not do it. But something as arbitrary as take your click track and make it 3/4 instead. Or if all your songs are around 120 beats per minute, move it down to 90, see what happens. So doing something that's arbitrary, like I'm going to force myself to do a 2-chord song, or I'm going to force myself to have 4 different song sections, and every single one has to have a different chord progression, because usually I lean simple. Challenges like that can be helpful too.
Also, or go ahead, Chad.
No, I was just going to say, a good challenge is to write a song with 1 chord. I saw somebody said there's songs out there with 1 chord. Yeah, it makes you really have to think about rhythm, because you can play the same chord in different rhythms and actually have contrast between the sections. But take that as a challenge, or maybe take the challenge of, you have to write a song only using 1 note. Your melody has to be the same note, but you have to make it sound different throughout the song. So how would you do that?
If you then expanded that into something that wasn't that, it probably would be killer, because it would force you to make interesting rhythms. Right? If you can make something interesting with 1 note for 2 minutes, if you change it to not just 1 note, it's probably going to be killer. So that might even be an effective way to start a song, even just as an exercise.
So
then you could edit later.
Kind of, I guess, just observation from what we've been talking about is, it's good to be intentional with your songwriting. So it's so easy when you sit down to just, we're creatures of habit. We do what we've always done. You get in a rut. Things to start to sound the same. You're going to get stuck in the same places you get stuck. So something I've actually found helpful is, rather than just creating a bunch of random songs and then deciding, oh, I'm going to do an album or an EP or something, and then trying to figure out which songs to put together, actually like plan out your whole album or EP before you create it. And that's like, okay, here are the songs, even like number them, depending on how, say it's a 10-song album, 1 through 10 in terms of energy. And so which one's going to have the most energy, and which one's going to have the least energy, and what key is each song going to be, and what's the chord progression going to be. And like, you can decide all this beforehand, and you can even decide how am I going to start each song? Am I going to start with the chords first? Am I start with the melody first? And this is kind of forcing you to get out of those habits, get out of those ruts that you're in, and it's going to actually spark your creativity, and it's going to be a lot more fun. You're going to be probably finding things out you didn't know before, and creating a lot more interesting music when you've kind of already planned to do things differently in this order. Because right, we've kind of given a lot of ideas on how to do things differently, but then you sit down and you're like, oh, which one do I do? Well, you can actually map it out before you go to create them. And actually just makes me think of when I talked about, starting a song a different way. Joseph, you've got a good guide. I can just go to songwritertheory.com, and you have a guide on actually 20 proven ways to start writing a song in under 5 minutes.
That needed an upgrade significantly, so I did. It's shorter now, and it's better now, and it's 20 ways. So if you got the original version, get this version instead. It's way better, because the first one I wrote way too long ago, and it desperately needed an update. But yeah, great way to get unstuck if you're just generally dealing with writer's block, which one of the commenters beforehand was mentioned, not commenters on YouTube, but somebody that answered a poll question I put out there. They were talking about like just feeling totally creatively stuck. I know I talk about it a lot, but I don't know. It's just one of those that, like, for me, it's been so impactful to just have a bunch of different arbitrary ways to start songs, because it is so easy. Like, some people see it, it's so easy. We're creatures of habit, to Reagan's point, right? And you just over and over might just grab the guitar. And it's hard to overstate how powerful it is just going to a different instrument, changing the guitar effects that you're using. If you have an electric guitar, you always turn on the distortion. Just don't turn on the distortion. If you're like Reagan, and actually all three of us, I think, where we do a lot of recording while we're writing sort of thing, just use a different sound. I just decided, you know what? I freaking love organ. And I wrote 2 songs really quick, one of which I really love, and the other one, I guess, isn't totally done yet. But just because I was like, I love organ. I've never written organ before. So all of a sudden there's all this inspiration that I just wouldn't have had. I'm sitting at the same keyboard, that keyboard that's on the floor right now. Same keyboard.
Were
right?
you sitting?
The sound I heard was different.
Sitting cross-legged on the floor?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not usually there, but yeah.
Somebody brought up Tom Petty in the chat, and Tom is such a master of simple chords, but the way that he delivers them, they sound so great. And Tom is a master of melody too. Like, his songs are super catchy. Half the songs I love of his, I couldn't tell you a single lyric, but I love the songs. And his lyrics aren't bad, right? But I just know the melody more than I know the lyrics. When you're talking about writer's block and being completely creatively stuck, I think that's where like prompts and these little challenges that you give yourself come in, because our brains are, if we have too many options, we decide nothing, right? Whereas if you said you need to write a 2-chord song in the Phrygian mode and it has to be 89 beats per minute, your brain goes into problem solving mode, and you're like, bring it on, I can do that.
Yeah.
So sometimes all you need is just a random word,
Right.
Dude, starting with a word that resonates with you is a huge one. I love that.
Yeah.
I'll just pick a word or like an animal that I'm like, I want to use that as a symbol. How do I make it interesting?
Salamander.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Well, actually, tiger and wolf,
Salamander
who I've
army.
been playing with recently. I haven't gotten them to work yet, but they're 2 that I like a lot.
I want to reiterate what you said there, Chad, that when there's so many options, you just kind of get paralyzed. So I would just really recommend really planning it out. If you're going to be doing these challenges, decide when you're going to do them and what you're going to do that, or when you're going to do them and what you're going to do. So you're not in the moment saying, "Oh, what am I going to do differently?" Because now you're wasting time. You're getting stuck. Your creativity is seeping out of you in that moment when you have so many choices. I think they did a study once where they took a group of college students, and they had like 2 different groups. So, you could choose I think it was just, you can choose to do homework, or they gave them, or you can choose to study, or they gave them like 2 positive, like 2 desirable options, like going out to see a movie, or they can go get ice cream or something. And when they were given 2 choices, even though they're both, good, more desirable than doing homework, people more often chose to just stay home and study because they couldn't decide between the 2 good things. So actually having more good choices sometimes can be a detriment. So just really, before you start songwriting, plan what you're going to do.
That's
I don't think it's about more choices so much as being decisive about the thing. Right. So like if you have 100 choices, I think that's fine as long as you are like maybe give yourself 5 minutes and then be like, I'm overthinking it. I'm going to arbitrarily pick one and force
Bro, I'm
myself
not
to do that thing.
anti-choice. I'm just saying have a time to make your choice. That's not when
Yeah.
you're writing your song.
Yeah. For
Yeah,
sure.
I think the amount of choice you have within music production now, like you have 8 different EQs, you have like 12 different synth bass sounds. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, in
Got
some ways,
12,000 presets and sound in your
right.
sound bank, right? All these different sounds in your synth.
But sometimes it's fun to like pre-pick some sounds just kind of at random and say,
Mm.
like, I have to write a song with these sounds and make it
Yeah.
sound good. Like, challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Because
Bagpipes. Go.
yeah, bagpipes, yeah. Bagpipes and carillons.
Yeah.
And Erhu.
Didgeridoo.
Dude, quick thing on both. First of all, didgeridoo absolutely makes the Diary of Jane intro. If you don't know Diary of Jane by Breaking Benjamin, they have a didgeridoo in the beginning, and it absolutely adds a lot to it, to
Cool.
the guitar part. And then also Hans Zimmer is a great person to look to if you want some inspiration on changing up sounds. I slightly joke about bagpipes, but I'm totally not joking. What he did with the Dune soundtrack, and he even made a bagpipe sound that really is an electric guitar. There's a video about it. I posted it to my subs a while ago, but go check it out. Just it's type Hans Zimmer talking about Dune soundtrack. It's like a 10-minute video. I think Vogue did it or something. I don't remember who did it, but great way to go. It's the sound.
Also like challenge yourself to write a crappy song. It's harder than you think to write a really bad song. Like you have to kind of really try to write a bad song.
Ooh, that's a hot take.
Or try to write 5 bad songs. That's even harder.
I don't know. If you go back to the first 5 songs you wrote, do you think that's still true? I guess it depends what bad means.
I don't think they were bad. I think they were
Mid.
Unrefined.
Sure. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, one other tip when it comes to like plugins and synths, especially, like spend some time when you're not songwriting and just go through and like favorite the patches that you like the best. That way you're not going to be doom scrolling for hours trying to find the best sounds. You already have them in a favorites folder. You know, okay, these are my favorites, so they're going to at least sound okay, and that can save you a lot of time.
Yeah, that's great advice. Same with like if you have a plugin that's like, so for example, I have Omnisphere, which has like a bazillion sounds, right? So I take the time to like 5-star the specific ones that I know, like revisit this, maybe build a song off of it, or just use this. And once in a while, I'll do like a songwriting session where really I'm just looking for a sound. And I might not write anything, but the goal isn't to write something. The goal is to find a sound that resonates with me that then I can write off of. But then to your point, don't do when you're actually trying to write, don't doom scroll, but taking some time where you're intentionally just finding sounds or thinking about something to try it's a little meta, right? Because you're effectively meta deciding on song stuff. But I think those meta song sessions are really helpful. Like whether the song sessions where you're just songwriting sessions where you're just gathering ideas for songs lyrically or musically, and you have no intention of actually writing it. You literally are just looking for ideas. You're looking through Google Images, finding art that resonates with you, and coming up with a title off of a picture that you think, ooh, that really moves me. Or whether that's just finding a sound that you think resonates with you, or something like, dude, Star Wars has a lot of cool sounds. How did they make that? And then try to apply that to your music, right? The TIE Fighter is famously, but if you're not a nerd like me, maybe you don't know this, but TIE Fighter is something like the sound of an elephant and an elephant reversed and pitch shifted down or up or something. And then I think it has another
I didn't know
animal
that.
mixed in. I'm currently forgetting. So if somebody in the chat knows, but it's basically an elephant is what the
Picturing an
TIE
elephant
Fighter
now
sound
making
is.
that sound.
Yeah, I mean, they pitch shift it and time stretch it, right? But like that's, and back to something I said earlier about like find a way to dive deeper in your songwriting or just anything artistically. One way that you can choose to dive deeper is into sound. So probably Orpheus Audio Academy people, you don't need to be told this, right? You already do this. But for those of us that are like songwriters first and foremost and producers second, or maybe some of us never even have done production, that's a great way to get better or to just get creatively refreshed in songwriting is to think a little bit more like a producer and try to figure out a cool sound that you can build a song off of, which I think a lot of songwriters sometimes don't even consider, especially if they don't have recording software, or if they just have an acoustic guitar and they've been going with that.
But I think that's for the people who do just play like acoustic guitar. Even just recording a different groove and not singing while you're playing, like separating the playing and singing at the same
100%.
time can open up new ideas, because you're
100%.
not having to think about playing while you're coming up with melodies or something.
Yeah, sets you up for success too. Like, people can't multitask. Like, there's so many studies about that it's like, anybody who tells me at the very few times has like science completely said like this is it, there is no alternative. But man, as far as like psychological science goes, it's pretty clear that like almost everybody really can't multitask. So
you're split tasking, you're switching
always,
from one task to another. You're not doing both at the same time.
Yeah. So it's almost always better to do exactly what Chad's talking about. I cannot remember now, if anything, I challenge myself. All right, this time do try to write a melody or sing a melody while I'm doing the other thing. Because almost always it is just get the piano riff and then just do the melody, which probably should be the de facto way most of us do it. But I think a lot of times it's reversed, where people are overwhelmed and they're like, why am I overwhelmed? It's like, well, you're trying to write poetry. No, I'm sorry. You're trying to improvise poetry at the same time that you're trying to improvise a melody, at the same time you're trying to improvise a chord progression. You're setting yourself up to fail. It's not that you suck at songwriting. It's that you're asking way too much of yourself, which is a good thing, right? Just separate it out and you'll be like, oh, wow, I can do this. So set yourself up for success.
The using the phone is actually fine
100%
these days. Like phones actually sound really good.
And I do that all the time.
Yeah,
all the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just to
it's not about having
capture those ideas.
Yeah. It's not about having it in sound good. It's just about your brain not only having to think about one thing at a time. So with your phone, if you wrote a chord progression, just like maybe if your phone's recording software can't like loop, just think about like, okay, you force yourself. It's going to be kind of weird, but just play that chord progression for like 4 minutes straight. That way you can hit play and just improvise melodies for 4 minutes straight. Because if you have to hit play every 30 seconds, that's going to get kind of irritating, right? But something as small as that works just as well.
So I had on my YouTube channel, I had the host of From Musician to Artist on YouTube. Craig Honeycutt is his name. He said he likes to start songs melody first, no chords. And like, that's something I want to try more of, is coming up with a catchy melody and then sort of harmonizing it later. But I'm so much of a chord, melody, lyrics person.
Yeah. I think it is stronger for having a melody that... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's what Max Martin recommends too. He does melody first.
I find that's a way easier way if you want your melody to go somewhere and to be less religiously call and answer. So for example, I have done that for a couple songs, and I found that if you want a melody that, I don't know how to say this in a way where it doesn't sound bad, but like, I think sometimes we do get too caught up in call, answer, where it's like very like A, B, A, B, A, B. And not all songs have to be that. Some songs really shine if it's more like A, B, C, D, and there's like reflection, but like really it goes somewhere. So especially if you want to write a melody like that, I found that starting with the melody can be really helpful, because you don't have like the chords that are kind of almost willing you to that strict call answer pattern. Which I don't think either is right or wrong. I think it's probably just it helps to do both kind of thing.
So Jay Bella, if I'm saying that right, says trying production kind of takes the creativity away in some way. And I'm curious what you mean by that, because that's the only way I've ever written songs, because I can't play an instrument. If it's like the software is something that you've not mastered, then obviously, that can trip you up. Because if you're spending time trying to learn something, then that's going to take away your creativity, because two different sides of your brain. But once you master, like for me, like I don't even notice my DAW. It just becomes an extension of myself. And that's the way I've always created music, is programming in a DAW, but everyone writes a different way. So you got to find, what's the best way for you to write. And if that's just using your phone, that's totally fine. You just write it that way. And then you go in recording as a whole separate process. That's the way it's been. That's the way it was for a long time, up until computers and everything. Everyone would, write a song that's a separate from recording it, from mixing it, from mastering it. But now with the way computers are with DAWs, kind of the way I do things, that's why I was confused in the beginning. Like, what's the difference between mixing and writing a song, and what's the difference between writing and recording? Because I was kind of doing all three at the same time when you're making electronic music inside of a computer.
Yeah.
So
Don't let it get in the way too. Like,
I
there's
think-
something to be said for, like, it depends, right? Like, we can all let all of these things get in the way. We can you could have like a fully mixed and mastered verse before you write a chorus. But I think the key there is forcing yourself to some version of simplicity, because I feel like done a certain way for almost anyone, production while writing can be absolutely massive and helpful. But I 100% believe it can get in the way too. So it's kind of finding what line for you is it. Even if it's something like you only allow yourself one instrument in the DAW, you have to finish the song with that one instrument and then move on, right? So let's say you're using the organ or bagpipe sound or some synth. You do that, and then you are not allowed to touch mixing or EQ. You're not allowed to touch any of that until you finish. If you need to create a rule like that for yourself to make it more helpful, that could be another way to go.
If I could
just because it's so hard to fathom, like, having access to more sounds being a detriment outside of allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by it, which can happen to all of us from time to time for sure, but trying to take measures to not have that happen.
And Theory of Surrender says, thank you for sharing that, Reagan. I'm not very good at instruments, mostly use DAWs, pretty insecure about it, honestly. Hey, me too. But it's actually, I've learned there's a lot of big producers out there in the same place, like Deadmau5, for example. He doesn't play an instrument. He just draws stuff in on his computer and does production that way. So would I like to be able to play an instrument? Yes, I'd like to learn. I want to learn piano. I want to learn guitar. Just finding the time is difficult, but it's totally not illegitimate to create music that way. In fact, lots of people create music that way. Some people don't even use DAWs. They use these pieces of gear, like Machina is one of them. They use these different ways of producing. So there's lots of different ways to create music. So don't feel like one way is inferior to another way if it works for you.
Work within your limitations, and if you can, make it into a strength. I say this a lot, so forgive me for those who have heard this before, but Johnny Resnick of the Goo Goo Dolls thought that he wasn't a very good guitarist, but he was a songwriter. So he worked around those limitations by coming up with a bunch of different guitar tunings to compensate for the fact that he wasn't that great of a guitarist. And that is what creates their super iconic sound. Like they just sound different. It's subtle, but they have a different sound than pretty much anybody else from that era, largely created by those guitars. And that's working within a limitation.
I didn't shake my head at Deadmau5. I actually like his music. Like, I like that stuff. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking of. There were so many things thrown out there that I wanted to comment on, but I like electronic music. Like, I grew up listening to like pop, R&B stuff, like 80s hip hop. Like, I go back to writing songs and recording when we were doing multi-track cassette. You know what I'm saying? So like, computer music was like the dream when I started, because I think I'm the old man here in this group. So, but yeah,
doesn't take much, because I guess we're on the younger side. If it makes you feel better, I mean, being like 35 would make you old in this group.
Yeah, so I'm beyond that.
See, I gave you a nice out. You're like, nah.
It just means you're wiser than us.
Yes.
Yeah. Been through some things.
100%.
But I think the feeling insecure about using a DAW, right? Like, a DAW is an instrument, really. You know what I mean? Like, I think that learning how to use the technology to make music that's a skill, right? Like, think about hip hop when people started, using turntables. Nobody ever thought of a turntable as an instrument themselves, right? But a whole genre was born from adapting another art form. And all art is derivative in some point or of some kind from things that came before it. Everything is built on something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, even using a mixing console, right? Back in the days before DAWs and computers, you had the mixing console. Manipulating that was kind of like playing an instrument, like because what they would do is they'd have to ride the faders, right? So the lead vocal drops out, and you have the lead guitar solo coming in. We gotta move the fader up on the guitar, or the guitar drops out. You gotta pull that back.
Oh,
So you
you have
watch,
like,
and because you're recording in real time.
yeah.
So as you're playing back the mix, you're actually cutting to tape or whatever, and so you have to be moving stuff in real time, which, right, you didn't have automation you could draw in on your DAW, so that was like an instrument you're playing, or even like if you want to adjust EQ on the fly. So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's all. So
I remember going to a studio with some friends in high school, and we were trying to do this really complicated fading, like muting and soloing thing. And we all had our fingers on different buttons on the board, and we literally had to push buttons or move faders at the right time. And now we can program that stuff in the DAW. I think some people don't realize in the olden days it wasn't like that.
yeah, DAWs, if you can learn a DAW, it makes things a lot easier, and really fast, because you're kind of like Joseph talks about, you're kind of right, you're writing, you're recording, and to some extent, if you're mixing at the same time, and so you can get stuff done really quickly.
um, and then ADATs came around, and we were recording on VHS tapes, digital. Yeah, Aisle 9 started with a 4-track cassette machine, then 8-track reel to reel. Yep, absolutely.
I feel
I
so
actually,
spoiled right now. I've
I
literally never recorded without a computer, and I started when I was
wow.
14. It sucked, and the mic sucked, and I will never let that song see the light of day, the one that I did record. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
started
I
with
feel very spoiled right now.
Cubase 7.5, I think it was. So that wasn't even that long
Mm.
ago. So I'm probably the newbie here.
So I
Um,
went to the recording workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio in 1997, and part of our learning was how to loop music by splicing tape. So we actually learned how to use razor blades
Yep.
and splice by beat and tape it together to loop through tape.
Yeah, my
That's so
my
crazy to think
instructor
about
talked
now.
about that, how he would have to do that. That
Yeah,
does not sound fun.
No, it does not.
it was a necessity, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, even like the flange effect, that was from, I can't even remember now. I'm pretty sure that was like a physical effect from like pressing on the tape or something to create the flange effect, which is now just a plugin in your DAW.
Yep. Well,
Mistakes are
even
opportunities, for sure.
even delay was just like a weird feedback from tape or something like that. It was a tape delay. You could adjust where the head was, or you'd have two heads, and one would play the thing first, and then the next one would play it after. And yeah, everything now is just, um, yeah, plugins. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Ableton.
I've never used I've used it a little bit, but I'm not an Ableton expert. So I guess we are kind of moving into the Q&A section that we wanted to cover, because unless there's other tips you guys had that on how to finish songs faster. But yeah, you can. I don't know if either of you guys used Ableton.
I
have
haven't. I haven't.
Yeah.
So
L9 still uses
I'm a Reaper
Cubase.
guy, and I've used a couple others, but mostly what I know is Reaper.
I use Logic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's that one. That's the one.
Logic's what I use now. It's
I
really good.
use
That's Mac only now, right?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
always
Mac,
been.
yeah, that's the one I would have moved to if it wasn't Mac only.
Yeah, well, I
'Cause I had
moved. I
classes in
moved.
college that used
I
that.
moved to Mac partially so I could use Logic.
Um,
Really? Wow.
Not
so did I.
completely. My instructor also was just telling me that Mac's basically better, a lot better than PC for music production and creative things. So I'm like, I trusted him because he's been using Mac since like the beginning. Um, so he has like this old room full of his old Mac computers, and they're like go way back. So he's like, and I mean, I used to use PC, and every I had a laptop, and this every so many years, it would just stop working. And then since I switched to Mac, I've never had a computer break on me.
So I originally started on PC back in the day, and I was using Cakewalk. I used and
Mm.
back then it was just MIDI. It was just a MIDI sequencer. It wasn't even audio. But then they added audio, and then it became Sonar, and I used that for a long time until I switched over to Mac and got Logic. But I never used to. But people would always say Mac is so much better for like creative things, and it's like I don't know. It, I think everything can be creative
Yeah.
depending on how you use it, you know?
I don't want to get involved in this flame war because I'm too passionate about it, but
Oh,
not that you guys are warring, just the general Mac PC. But
oh.
anybody who
I'm
tells
not
you
I'm not
Macs are
that
more
passionate.
creative should no. That's ridiculous.
For all
Yes,
I
it's
care about
true
is
that Macs.
reliability.
Yeah, it is true that like Macs will probably work better for longer generally, but that's ignoring that like yeah, but they cost like way more. So just do the
I just know
operating system you
I
like
was going
better.
through a
Anybody
lot
who
of
tells you
computers.
one is better than the other, like it kind of depends. Do you want more customizability? Go PC. For all of you that just want something, a computer that works and you like the OS of Mac, it's fine. Just know that you are paying a premium because it's a Mac, and no, it's not just better. Like
So it
that's
looks like
my
what Theory of Surrender
take
was
for people like
asking
that.
was, I think, on the piano roll is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I already answered
Section.
that in the
Oh, you
chat,
did?
but C4 is middle C, and C5 is what is sometimes referred to as tenor high C, which I only clarify because I think a lot of times, especially from us guys, I think we actually sing a note an octave lower than what we think. So if you like play C4 middle C on a keyboard, I think a lot of times we actually sing C3. So people don't realize that like tenor high C, that like premium high note is just one octave above middle C, which is C4.
I drank too much high C one time and got sick. I don't recommend it. That was a long time ago.
I think from a DAW perspective, I think we're at the point now where it's just they all kind of do the same thing, where you just have to pick what works for you.
Yeah. They're all good.
For sure.
They all sound great. It's just a workflow preference at this point, like which works best for you. And if you have a DAW that you like, there's no reason to switch.
Yeah. So I saw a question that yes, that's the question. All right. Here is my admittedly biased but take. I think that it for speed, guitar; for effectiveness, long term, piano. I think it's easier to write more interesting music with the piano than it is with the guitar. My basic point on this is really like so first of all, with the piano, it's easier to write melodies than with guitar. The lowest level of piano writing is like playing a melody, right? Somebody goes over to a piano and they're like, "Oh, I can play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." I'm not degrading that. I'm just saying like we all have that friend, right? They don't play piano, but they can like play a melody. On guitar, it's actually not the lowest level skill. The first thing you learn on guitar is very chord centric. But on piano, basic chords is also very easy. I also think for just coming up with more interesting chords, piano is way more intuitive because you can kind of visualize for example, all the white keys are C major or A minor or whatever. And you can easily visualize, okay, I have a C major chord. I'm just going to like move my middle finger to the D instead of the E. And now I have a C2 chord. And maybe you don't know what a C sus2 chord is, but it's just a little easier, I think, to kind of make up chords without knowing music theory on the piano. And also like not to go here, but all of the greatest composers of all time, with almost no exception, are first and foremost pianists. Vivaldi is maybe the exception, who I believe only played violin. And I think the reason for that is the piano is such an intuitive instrument for writing and writing a lot of parts and visualizing. So I think it's a much stronger instrument for writing. But also guitar will get you there probably faster, because you could like go from starting to learn guitar to playing guitar at an open mic and singing probably in 2 months. Piano, 2 months of piano, we're probably going to tell like, oh, they just started learning piano, but you can probably pull off performing a song a little quicker on guitar. My real answer is learn both. They're both absolutely huge, but if I had to choose one, I would definitely go piano.
Yeah, it's got the biggest octave range to what you're working with there.
Yes. Bo's point is perfectly said. You can absolutely see the music more clearly on piano, for sure.
Yeah, I think piano is a faster, like it's just easier to jump into it quicker.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can, like Aisle 9 says, learn to play both.
100%.
I agree. Like I have a guitar, but I don't really play it. So I was thinking actually doing the goofy tuning thing too. Like if I want to make a chord, let me just tune all the strings to like the chord and I'll sample myself playing, right?
That's what I've done.
Which could be a sound like like Joseph said. But I think from a learning perspective, I think there's more of a learning curve with guitar, especially from being able to visualize what's happening with notes and what's happening with chords. Like I think it's a little bit harder on guitar.
It's also way harder to do inversions on guitar. It's not intuitive, to the point that I would say when I talk inversions with pianists, they're just like, oh, I get it. Yep. When you try to explain inversions to a guitarist, because no guitarist thinks inversions, right? They just think G major chord. They take for granted, like for example,
chord shapes.
If you play an E minor chord on a guitar and you let nope, that's not a good example. If you play a C, I'm trying to think of an example of I think a C9 chord, if you play on guitar, technically is the second inversion because it has the G in the bass, if I remember correctly. But like, you don't even think about those things. But on piano, it's very intuitive. Like, change the bass note from a C with a C major chord to an E major chord. It's trivial, makes a huge difference in sound. So it's also like easier to do music theory type things like that make a huge difference in a song. Because as a guitarist, you need to get a bass guitarist to change the inversion usually, right? Like if you think in inversions, as a pianist, you do the chord and the inversion together. Unless you're a really good guitarist, you're probably just thinking about the chord and you're hoping that the bass person can come up with what the inversion is. But a pianist can do it at the same time, trivially.
So there was a question. Christopher Severn asked, has anybody used Band in a Box? Have you guys used that?
I've not.
I haven't used it, but I've worked with people that have. I think it's a cool tool to quickly try out different arrangements and different chord progressions. Personally, I think some of their tracks sound a little bit cheesy, and I don't know if they're like release ready, but I think from a writing standpoint, I think that it can be a good tool if you're not necessarily a musician. So it would be a good way to try out different chord progressions and kind of top line songs. But I would say that what I've heard people do with it, they always have to add other things to it to make it sound total release ready, if that makes sense. It has a little bit of a cheesy kind of sound to it, but definitely powerful to write to, I think.
Would you put it in the same category as like AI, where it's like it's good if you use it very much in a supplemental role or to get ideas role, but if it's kind of one of your main things, you're misusing it? Is it kind of in that category?
Yeah, I think it's a creativity tool, and maybe they've made it better since I've used it, but a lot of people that I know that use it will use maybe parts out of it. They might use a bass line, or maybe like some people I know who do country, they'll use it for like a fiddle part, and then everything else will be either played live or they'll use other things with it. But yeah, I think it's a great tool depending on what you want to do. But to be honest, there's a learning curve to that too, because it looks kind of like it looks complicated when you open it up. So you have to kind of have some idea of song arrangement. You have to have some idea of song form. You kind of have to understand chords a little bit, but as far as if you're not able to play, I think it's a good tool.
And probably something to add to that is it's good to work within your limitations at first. That doesn't mean we shouldn't also address our limitations. So
Correct.
if you're coming at it from I don't know any music theory and I don't know how to play an instrument, then that's probably a great place to start. Just like sort of just copying a chord progression from a song you like is a great place to start. But I would advise against just never moving past that, right? So it's kind of a use it now, but don't use it as a crutch long term. Don't use it as an excuse to not like learn things that will be helpful and frankly make it more fun. I think a lot of times why people balk at music theory, is because they usually don't even know what it is. They think it's reading sheet music, which it has nothing to do with. But I think another thing is like they don't understand that like no. I promise you it will make writing music way easier. Like way easier. Do you think about it all the time? No, but it's such an effective tool for being able to be intentional with your music writing and be more efficient with your music writing. So I think a lot of times people don't understand that. They just are too busy thinking about like it's academic or whatever, which I don't even know where that comes from. But maybe Band in a Box is kind of in that same realm of like it's okay if you need it now, but still challenge yourself to maybe in the next year move it from a primary role to a supplementary role in the next year or something like that.
And if I could add one quick tip on the subject of finishing songs faster in the mixing department is having a system, a repeatable system that you follow every time is really a huge help. Because when I was first getting into mixing, I was kind of just chasing fires, trying to put out fires. Is like, what's the problem? Let me address that problem. Okay, that problem's done. Let me do this other problem. Oh no, that first thing I fixed now doesn't sound good anymore. And you're just constantly going in circles, chasing your tail, and things get all out of whack. And then you just spend hours and hours trying to finish a song and you never get done. So for me, really actually figuring out a system, a proven system that a lot of other producers use to not only help you finish songs faster, but actually get consistent quality music done each and every time. Because that's the other thing was I was struggling to get consistent quality every time. So really dial in a proven system for finishing your music, and that's going to help you tremendously. Like so we've talked about, I think previously, the 80-20 rule of Pareto's principle, that you can get 80% of your results from just 20% of your efforts. Well, 20% of your efforts in this case is really having a mixing system if you're going to be mixing your own music, and that's going to get you 80% of the way there.
Aisle 9. So with I want to come to aisle 9's comment, but on the mixing thing, do you use a mix bus? Like, do you have anything on your mix bus, or are you more purist?
I do like to use a mix bus. I like to use kind of a top-down mixing strategy. So that would be starting with the mix bus. So that's where all your tracks are summed to. And
Yep.
then from there, you have several group buses. So I'll group like all my drums together, group all my kind of rhythm instruments together. So like maybe chords and arps, and then group my leads, vocals, etc. And then after I do the mix bus, then I go down to the group buses, and then finally the individual tracks. And that really cuts down on the time and prevents you from just overloading your system with plugins. Because like when I used to do it, I would start with each individual track. So it's like, well, every track has to have compression, right? And every track has to have EQ, right? Well, not necessarily. Like some tracks are fine especially if you're playing, group processing, right? You can just, if you want those groups of instruments to kind of have the same EQ curve and fit in the same region of your track, you can just apply one EQ to that group, and then you're done, and then you can move on. So yeah, I really like that top down mixing strategy, because it's saves a lot of time, saves a lot of processing on your computer, and you can get a lot more consistent results when you have fewer moving pieces going on.
So do you have any favorite mix engineers?
I know I like of Andrew Sheps is
Yep.
definitely inspiring to me, especially since he mixes. I don't know if he still does this, but I watched the video where he says he completely mixes in the box, meaning he does everything in the computer. He doesn't have any outboard gear or mixing console, and so he just has a lot of tutorials, and he teaches a lot of really creative techniques I would have thought of. So yeah, he's probably my favorite.
My favorite mix engineer is Serban Gania. I don't know if you've heard of Serban, but he's probably one of the most successful mix engineers. At one point, he had 25 of the Hot 100 at the same time
Wow.
that he had mixed.
Jeez.
But he has a sound, and in my mixing, I tried to figure out what he's doing, and I've like scoured the internet to try to figure out what his secret is. And I think they do top-down mixing, but I think they have something super simple on the mix bus, and I think it has to do with like it's like adding some kind of saturation and multi-band compression. But yeah, there's a certain sound to his mixes that I'm just like, how are they doing that? So yeah, if you should look him up if you're into like mixing and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I usually will do some compression. I'll usually definitely multi-band compression, and then if I'm wanting more of a vintage sound, I'll probably put like an SSL style bus compressor on there.
Cool.
And then saturation as well, because so that's kind of that's a big thing too. Saturation, when you're doing everything in the box, you don't realize how much you're missing out on, right? Because when people talk about the analog sound, they're talking about saturation. So if you can use plugins that emulate, actual physical equipment, that can help add life. Because what saturation is it's basically subtle distortion and also compression. And so that is what's going to really just make your song sound more expensive. It gives it a more expensive analog sound. It sounds richer, gives more texture, things. It's adding in extra harmonics. And what that means is, right, it's just adding extra frequencies and above and below the tone, the key tone of the sound. And so it just makes things more it's like adding more colors to your sound. And so that's a big thing too when mixing in the boxes, to use saturation.
Wow. Jeanette says she had to use a fountain pen like Beethoven. That's hardcore. Somebody said, what's the mixer's name that I said? Serban Gania. It's SERBANGHENEA. And his company's called Mix Stars. You can Google it by that. Right now, I'm running through a 1073 Neve, and then also 1176.
So you got some outboard gear.
Outboard. Nice. My voice is really nasally, and like digitally, it sounds really harsh. So I wanted to try something that added a little bit more warmth. I don't know. I have to learn how to mix it, but my voice is like when I try to mix it. So I got to figure out how to do it, because I want to sound like the 1975.
Dude, I think this is going to be really weird, but sometimes I will analyze how singers. This isn't going to sound weird, maybe, but you ever just try to analyze how is the singer actually singing? Because so often I feel like we take for granted they're singing and they have a sound. Like, that's true, but every voice is put on to a degree, right? Like every song, every voice is something you created. Like, because you can make it more nasally purposefully. You can make it less nasally purposefully. You can make it more throaty purposefully. You can choose to approach notes in different ways. But sometimes I feel like we just take for granted, like, oh, they sound good. It's like, well, okay, but what is it they specifically are doing? Because sometimes if we do the same thing that our favorite artist does, we think it sucks. But it's just because like we don't imagine our own voice sounding that way. So all to say, that's something I've been trying to do recently, is get better about analyzing what is it actually about. Like, is it the mixing? Is it because there are some artists that I'm pretty sure are really nasally, but they kind of cut it out, right? Like there are some that you can almost hear the nasaliness through it, and then sometimes it's intentional, right? Like in any sort of punk, seemingly it's, I assume, intentional, because they all do it.
Right, Maroon 5 singers can be very nasally.
But they EQ the
Most people
crap
do.
out of it, if I
Well,
remember correctly, right? Because it
but
doesn't
like
sound that nasal by the time they're done.
I don't know.
Or-
It's sometimes it's too much for me. So,
like
Really?
if you listen to like some like synth pop artists, like I know Reagan,
Mhm.
you're into that. Their voices sound so smooth yet really airy. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And when I try to do that, it just comes out being super harsh, or there's no body to my voice anymore. So it's like, is it the mic? Is it how they're
Mhm.
mixing? Or maybe my voice just isn't like theirs. I don't know.
Or they have a double underneath that is adding body that's really subtly mixed in. Because
Could
sometimes it's
be.
that too,
yeah,
right?
multi-band compression could help with that too. Um,
Mm.
even upward compression, right? If you're wanting to
Mm,
boost it at certain points, but not the whole way through, like you would with an EQ. Or you're wanting to, right? That's the nice thing about multi-band compression is it's dynamic, so it's only when it gets to be too much or not enough that's when it's adding that back in.
right. Yeah, that's my quest. But I also should
Mm.
probably take voice lessons too. Let's be real.
Yeah. I would like to go. I
Yeah,
don't pretend like I haven't time, but I would like to go back because, man, I did 2 different bouts of voice lessons with 2 very different teachers. One was a young lady who was clearly on the pop side of things, and the other was an old dude or older dude, probably north of 65. So pretty old dude who was very classical. But honestly, I learned like different things from both that I thought were really helpful. And man, I feel like voice lessons, if you want to go far quickly, they can be so helpful. Also, there's some great voice lessons people like Chris Lipe on YouTube. I keep
Yeah.
giving him totally free shout outs, but he's so good that I have to just keep mentioning
yeah, that's
that.
something to keep in
That guy's the
mind
man.
too. It's like it's so important to get things right at the source. So you want to record things to sound
Yeah.
mixed and then mix your songs to sound mastered. So that could be, yeah, maybe just we need to improve as performers, because a lot of times my songs, like I feel like there's something off about them, like they inherently sound less professional than what I hear like other people doing. And then like I'll have someone else work on my track and okay, they didn't really do very much. So it's just I don't like my voice, or my voice doesn't, I'm not a great singer. So
Mm.
like sometimes if you're not a great singer, just hearing your own voice on your track can make it sound not professional because it's not what you're used to hearing.
True. What's a good way to learn drum rhythms?
So
I
I'm not a drummer, but what's helped me is just listening to other drum rhythms I like and breaking them down. And so like what are they doing?
Mhm.
What actual drums are they using in each section of the song? What are they doing for their drum fills? And so just kind of just analyzing that. And then also just like looking at like loops. If you have any loops, and you can pull those into your DAW, and you can actually really actually see them, see what notes are being played. I know UJam has some great drum plugins that I like using a lot because they have a bunch of different loops based on different genres of music. So you can just like drag and drop those into your DAW, and then you can change it, or you can actually see what's going on, how they do those drum fills. And a big part of it is having what I see a lot is swing, that things aren't always exactly locked on the grid unless you're going for like a super, you know, like electronic style where everything's like very machine like. But even using drum machines, a lot of times you can introduce swing and stuff. So that's kind of a big part of it. Is just for me, it's just been studying what other people are doing and what you like, and then applying that yourself.
Yeah, that was gonna be my advice too. Like that's how I learned, was just imitating the songs that I liked and trying to figure out where's the kick drum hitting, where is the snare drum hitting. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, your snare is gonna be on the 2 and the 4, right? Like that's the place where the snare fits, and then your kick drum is doing something different. But yeah, aisle 9 says MIDI loops can be great for learning because you can see it visually. Um, if you read drum score. See, I can't read music. I can't read like, so that means nothing to me. So it's all learning by ear. But Bo says remake the songs that you learn, and you can, or remake songs and you can learn quite a bit. 100%. Like just totally try to remake songs exactly the same, and you'll learn so much by doing that. Yeah.
Connecting that to the voice too, that's another great way to, when I was, I don't know, 16 or 17, that's when I would say I started creating my voice. That feels a little weird to say, but like I said, every voice is somewhat put on to the point that like now to me, the
I'm still
different tones I
figuring mine
use is
out.
natural.
I always sound
Yeah.
different in every song I do.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some of that, right? But like a part of it too is learning to emulate the artists that you like, because at some point you're going to be some conglomeration of what you like, and maybe not artists you like. Maybe I should say the vocalists you like, ones that are similar to you, that you feel like, oh, I kind of want to learn to sing like them, and just like learning to listen for what are they actually doing, and then trying to emulate that. So when you sing along to a song, something I did a lot in high school that I think was helpful, try to not sing like you singing along with the song, but try to match what they're doing. So if you're listening to Maroon 5, try to get that Maroon 5 tone. If you're listening to the 1975, I think he tends to be very, very low. He just has a certain resonance that he's using that I think is down here. That
Must be
actually
listening to
feels
different
awkward to
1975
try to
songs.
do if you try to do along with it. Or like some of you know, Vertical Horizon's my favorite artist, and for him specifically, especially with the like Everything You Want album, and especially the song Everything You Want. Well, not the song Everything You Want, but he has this specific tone that has like this bitter sound to it, like where he just can sing something where he sounds like a bitter dude. Uh, in my opinion, flawlessly. I can't think of somebody who sounds more bitter when they sing than him, specifically with the Everything You Want and Go albums. And I learned to do that just from singing along with him and trying to sound like him. So
Can
it
you
can be something you can
demonstrate?
do. No,
Okay.
no, I'm not going to do that. Go listen to it.
Okay.
Theory of Surrender says that's so different from what I've heard. All my coaches have said hit their notes in your voice.
I mean, if that works, go for it. I just think it's a great way to be able to find and adjust your voice. Because if you just sing everything in the voice you already have, or the voice you already choose to use, would maybe be a better way of wording it. Because the idea that you just have this one voice and it's totally natural to you, I think is not true. If you think about it, like, why would you even need to have voice lessons? Like, you go to classical voice lessons, they teach you to sing a certain way from a certain resonance, versus a pop singer who
Yeah.
will teach you to sing a different way. So if that's the case, then clearly you don't have just a voice. So I guess it depends what you're trying to do.
I was making an audiobook as a Christmas present for my siblings one year a long time ago. And so I was like just reading this like Lego book, like Attack the Castle or something. And so I was doing different voices and I was doing like British accents and stuff. And immediately after I finished like recording that, I went to do vocals for one of my songs. I immediately like sang it in like a British accent, and it sounded kind of cool. So I'm like, so that's just like, yeah, you can. That shows what Joseph's talking about is you can kind of, there's different ways to sing. So finding your singing voice, it's not just you go and you sing. There's, like he says, every singing voice is kind of put on in a way. It's a intentional choice.
Great way to learn to sing higher as well, because I know a lot of people have that struggle of singing higher. One great way is to take Chris Lipe's free whatever Unlock Your Voice 4-part course or whatever. Don't know why I keep mentioning it, but he's that good. I swear he does not pay me at all. He doesn't even know who I am.
Why is he not on the show?
But
Hello.
I wish that dude's huge. If he would come on
the
this show,
him.
attention, Chris Lipe. If by some miracle you ever see this, please
All you
come
have to
talk
do is,
us, the man.
dude. How do you? I reached out to you, Joseph, and said,
Yeah, but
should
I'm a tiny
Joseph
fish.
is just so humble
Tiny
and
fish.
generous, though.
It only took like
How to respond to that.
It only took 4 months for
I
him to
feel
get
like
back
it's
to
fine.
me, but it's okay.
Yeah. In my defense, I really did completely ignore email for those 4 months. That was not a joke. Anybody can tell you during those 4-month periods, there were people that got an email from me 4 months later, probably thinking
Too much Graham Cochran.
what happened. Yes, probably from the Graham Cochran stuff, as I'm quite the acolyte. But another thing you can do for building your vocal range, find a song that like is right at the top of your vocal range and sing that thing obsessively. Or it's like one semitone above your vocal range. So if right now you're like, man, I can hit like an E above middle C and then my voice dies. Find a song that hits that E all the time and doesn't go higher. Sing it, sing it, sing it. And eventually, assuming you're doing it right and, all that. Don't kill your voice. But eventually that E will become easy, and then go up to the F, and then the F will become easy, then the F sharp. And I say this as somebody who completely, like, that is exactly how I built my range. I started with, like, I think I could get to an F comfortably. And then by the time I was at some point in college, I could, when warmed up, hit tenor high C pretty routinely. So I literally increased my range by like a sixth. So it's a great way to build your voice range as well for anybody who's trying to do that. Because a limited range can kind of limit you songwriting wise, especially if you want to do some Celine Dion kind of stuff. Because obviously none of us are close to Celine Dion. That's not what I'm saying. Don't mishear me. But if you want to have more like big melodies and a chorus that is significantly different of a range than your verse, a range does help.
So learn how to tune your vocals professionally. Every song is tuned these days.
Mm.
Like, yeah, through technology like auto-tune, Melodyne, those things. But I think what we're talking about with vocal lessons, it's more than just pitch, right? I think it's how are you getting the right tone out of your voice? Are you able to do runs? Are you able to like um just sing different styles and things? And I think that's what I would like to learn. And I have done some like YouTube, different exercises and things, and it actually helps if you do it on a regular basis, because it's not always about singing songs, it's about keeping the muscles able to hit the notes that your brain hears, right? Like I think that's a big part of it is can you sync your mind with your vocal cords? And I think that's what doing exercises does.
Yeah, my wife had vocal lessons for a long time, and that big thing she taught me was just breathing properly, is a big part of singing well, and warming up. So that's kind of some things I didn't know. Maybe a lot of people don't know that. It's just breathing the right way and warming up your voice can go a long way.
For sure.
All right.
I'm just reading the comments here.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
comments.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I was just off on the side responding to the Kurt Cobain and Trent Reznor, because I think there is something to it's like it's the same as the music theory thing, right? So people will be like, oh, this artist I love didn't know music theory. It's like, okay, but the question is, could they have been even better if they did know it? And I would argue the answer is yes.
But
So
how
it's
do you
probably true with voice lessons, probably, but also like I don't know, there are other artists where like I'm not a huge fan of Red, but I kind of like Red, and I feel like he lost some of his vocal character after he famously got voice lessons after the first album. I kind of prefer his tone before he got voice lessons. So I think there is something to like don't
Right. If it gets in your head.
let your vocal coach determine your voice. Make
Yeah.
you determine your voice.
But that's
If I have one piece of advice, it's that because I had like brief stints with two very different coaches, and basically what I learned is take what they taught, learn it, but don't like my voice is my voice and your voice is your voice. Whoever left that comment, and all of us, it's our own voices. So don't let a vocal coach like dictate where your voice goes. Because they have a certain sound in their head that they think is right. I mean, I've talked to people, if you talk to like your average music major, a lot of them will say that there's only one type of right singing and it's classical, which is obviously absurd, right? Tell that to Freddie Mercury, to bring up somebody else like him, one of the greatest vocalists ever. Like a lot of what he did is not classical at all. Some of it has some classical bits to it, but
that's it.
That's my advice, I guess.
A lot of classical music, you're taught to harmonize and sing as a choir, right? Whereas like pop singers are soloists. So there's a different way of singing, but yeah, you have to determine, how you want to sing. But I always like when people say things like, well, Bob Dylan didn't need to take a songwriting course. It's like, yeah, but you know what? Dylan went to college and he studied literature, and everybody talks about his lyrics, right? Like,
yeah,
Dylan was not born in a vacuum. God didn't shit out Dylan writing the songs that he wrote.
Yeah.
And he's not the end all be all of songwriters either, right? Like,
yes,
he had his time. And a lot of times I think people put a reverence around the memories that they have of the music when they heard that music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the music that's
Absolutely.
out now for the youngsters like Reagan, you're going to have those nice feelings about music that you really dig right now when you get older, right? Just like a lot of
Yeah.
people have those feelings for like Dylan and the Beatles and different people that I personally don't like.
Yeah, and I just, this argument drives me crazy. So forgive me for those of you who have heard me say this a million times. It's one of those where, like, if you think about it for a second, the argument that somebody I like didn't do a thing, therefore I don't have to do that thing, is a ridiculous on its face. Because first of all, it's not a question of whether you have to do things. It's a question of, will it make you better? Will it make life easier? And the answer for a lot of these things is clearly yes. I'm not talking about vocal coach here. That I think there's a big discussion. I think everybody should try it if you have the chance. Why not?
Yeah.
But like, I'm not currently taking voice lessons. I would kind of like to, but like, I think that could go either way. But like, there are always going to be people that, whether they were born blessed with a lot of talent or they just got lucky and they're not nearly as good as we all like to think they are. So, for example, on the athlete side, usually it's not that they aren't as good as we think they are, because athlete is the ultimate, the best win kind of thing, right? Like, literally, you will not make the team if you're not better. And like LeBron James and all the best basketball, Michael Jordan got there because they were that good, and that's just it, right? When it comes to music, it's not like that. Some of the most popular artists are probably not even that good. The idea that popular and good go together already is a huge stretch. So let's ignore that even for a moment, though. Just because, like, I try to, I feel like I used to pick on Randy Moss, but he's maybe not a perfect example of this. There are football players who have been great. No, here's a better example. Shaq. Shaq famously did not take care of his body and didn't work on free throws, which is why he's legendary. He was legendarily bad at free throws. So you could say, well, Shaq's one of the greatest of all time. He didn't practice his free throws. Correct. But he is so talented that he was able to be great without it. And the question is, if he did practice his free throws and if he did stay in shape, he would probably be the GOAT right now. Probably everybody would be like, Michael Jordan, psh, Shaq, he would be the GOAT right now, probably, if he actually put in the effort. So the question is not like, oh, did Bob Dylan do this? Did Nirvana do this? It's the wrong question. The question is, would they have been better off doing it? Or maybe even better. It's not about them. It's about you. Will you be better off learning music theory? Will you be better off if you learn a little bit more about poetry? And
right.
So anyway, I know it's a long rant, but it's just one of those things where, like, I feel like when people say that, they have not thought it through, where it's like,
Right.
man, I don't know what you think we're trying to sell you. Like, I get no money from you buying into the idea that music theory is helpful. Like, I don't own music theory, people. I'm not saying it for no reason. Like, I know it helped me a ton, and I know it will help you if you understand the basics.
When people say you're just born with it, like you either have it or you don't. It's like, that's just a cop out, lazy. That just tells me that you're too lazy to learn anything.
Yeah. Or that you're supremely arrogant and you think that you're so talented that you don't need to do anything. Right. It could be either way. I
also find it's fascinating that we only say that in regards to like music or creative pursuits. You don't say
100%.
You don't have enough talent to be a doctor.
100%.
No, if I put in the time and go to medical school for a bunch of years, then I can become a doctor. Well, same thing with music, right? If you put it in the time and you invest in your education and you get better, you can be a great musician, right? Sure, maybe talent comes in and determines what your ceiling can be, but you can have a really high floor. And that even goes for athletes too. You mentioned athletes, like it's interesting phenomenon is that a lot of the best coaches weren't great athletes themselves. And a lot of the really great athletes who try to be coaches aren't very good coaches because it just came natural to them. And so there's tons of athletes too who maybe aren't the most talented, but they put in the work and they get really high and really far in their career, even make it to the professional level. But maybe they're not as good as the very top end of the league, but they still have a lot of success.
But when people say, "Oh my gosh, like Serena Williams is so talented," what is talent?
So much,
she literally has played tennis every single minute of her life since she was a child. Is that talent?
Yeah.
Like she has played more tennis than probably like 99.999% of the entire population, right?
Yeah, probably everybody besides her, like the people that are more or less equivalent to her.
Right.
Right? That's why she's that great. Which is not to say she wasn't also born with talent. Of course, to be the best, you probably do have some talent. But it's
But
not
like,
talent that got her there. It's the work that got her there.
right.
Yeah.
But think of like people like Ashley Gorley, right? Like he has had the most #1 country songs of anybody ever. He's a songwriter. He was signed to a publishing deal for 7 years before he ever had one hit. And he was writing 1 to 2 songs every single day for those 7 years.
It's
So
crazy.
people who think that they can write 3 songs and 2 of them are supposedly supposed to be a hit, it's like me going to buy a tennis racket and saying, "I'm Serena Williams."
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it takes work to
Yeah.
get to where these people go. Same with like Max Martin. We brought up Max Martin before. Yes, he has a lot of hits, but how many songs did he do that we've never heard, or like how many times did he fall on his face? Like we
Yeah.
don't see what they're putting into it.
Yeah.
Looks like we've got a lot of our regulars dropping. We've been on
Yeah.
3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we should
know.
probably
I was at the beginning
wrap
gonna
up.
be like, hey, we should keep it to 2 hours, and here we are.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either.
Yeah, I guess we should wrap up. Real quick, when I was mentioning having a system is really important, you can actually grab my exact mixing system that I follow. You can go to orpheusaudioacademy.com/mixing checklist, and that will really help if you're wanting a step-by-step system, knowing this is what I do first, second, third, and so on when you're mixing your own music.
Cool.
And then Chad, I know you have something coming up in November.
Yeah, so I have a meetup group with At Home Songwriting, and November 4th, I'm kicking off a top lining challenge where I'm actually going to make a track and upload it, and then everybody's going to have a month to write to the track. And then in December, we'll have a song share where everybody shares their songs, and we can kind of, we're not going to critique, but we're just going to celebrate the work that everybody's done. And go to the link that's on the screen right now. And then that's where you can RSVP to join the meetups and do that. And I do at least monthly online workshops and things. So yeah, if you're looking to connect with other songwriters, that's a good place to do it.
Awesome. And just a reminder also, Joseph has great guides and free resources over on his website too, songwritertheory.com. Thank you guys so much for the amazing comments and for tuning in and watching. It's so amazing. Was really encouraged by seeing what you guys said. Theory of Surrender said that they were feeling a little dry and got really lifted up. So that's awesome.
Yay.
No, that makes our day.
At least one person was benefited by these 3 hours, guys. Worth it. Worth it.
So yeah.
Also, sorry to everybody who didn't see responses. I didn't think until now, because we're simul streaming on 3 channels, probably that the person that we were responding to, I imagine when I put it in the chat, it responds to my channel because it knows that I'm streaming to my channel. So if you were watching on Reagan's channel or Chad's channel, then you probably wouldn't have seen the replies. I think we ended up answering most of the things out loud anyway, eventually, but yeah, sorry about that.
And good news is we'll be doing more of these. We're trying to do these once a month, so we'll keep you updated when we'll be doing another one. And thanks so much to Chad for coming on. It was great talking to you for the first time here, and learned a lot myself. So this was great.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
I always learn when Chad's in the room. It's good stuff.
Excellent. All right. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you, and stay tuned.
Bye.